Even if they were warriors, they were still afraid of fire. After the unfortunate warriors were ignited by fire, they were no longer able to block the arrows coming from all directions. Instantly, countless arrows were hit. Their bodies were densely packed like a hedgehog. After the Great Desolate Army entered this planet, they were the first warriors to be killed. In the narrow passage, the warriors were huddled together, and more warriors were caught in the sea of fire. The bald man was very brave. He was holding a 2-meter-long sword, dashed madly to the outside. 2 arrows were hit in his body, but it didn't affect his speed at all. Immediately, he rushed to the front. "Stop him!" she shouted sharply. The elite soldiers at the mouth of the valley, armed with spears, surrounded the mouth of the valley. The bald man slashed wildly with a sword. Spears were being chopped over and over again. Soldiers fell one by one as they were approached by a warrior. Ordinary soldiers had a hard time resisting, but the soldiers of the Great Desolate Army were elites. They were not afraid of death. The front fell and the ones behind continued to rush up, and they surrounded the bald man and others. They were not letting them rush out. The good thing was that the passage was really small. There were not many warriors who could cross the sea of fire and rush out. The bald man and the few others frantically charged forward, but they were not able to break through the encirclement of the Great Desolate Army. A rain of arrows was all around, and it was still falling. The number of arrows hitting their body was increasing, and they fell behind. Other warriors who hadn't had time to enter the passage saw that the situation was not good. They returned directly towards the surrounding army to attack. It might be that they realized that they were going to die here today. All of them were crazy to the core. The battle situation at the mouth of the valley and in the valley was extremely tragic. The strongest was the bald man. He killed and wounded dozens of elite soldiers. However, they were helpless. The difference in numbers between the two sides was too great. Plus, there was no heart. Gradually, more and more warriors fell under fire, smoke, and arrows. There were fewer and fewer warriors left. By the end, the bald man with an unknown number of wounds also fell. Seeing this, John Denver breathed a sigh of relief and his eyes began to turn elsewhere. This was a warrior planet, and once there was a high level of warrior civilization. In addition to plundering the power of the origin, and other resources were also not a small harvest. As this was a warrior planet, there were many warriors and exercises. There might also be divine weapons and precious heavenly treasures. The resources of this planet were average. There were only some martial arts and exercises. After about 1 hour the battle was over inside and outside the valley. All the warriors were killed by the Great Desolate Army, but the Great Desolate Army also paid a small price. Hundreds of soldiers were killed and seriously injured. There were also many minor injuries, but in the end, it was a win. It was a victory against extraordinary humans. Among the remaining soldiers, most faces were beaming with joy and excitement. She was not too emotional and just let people clean the battlefield. On the other hand, he was researching the weapon that a warrior carried with him. The planet's life force bottomed out in an instant as all the 58 warriors were dead. The planet was moving at a speed visible to the naked eye, and it shrank down quickly. The original diameter was close to 100 kilometers, but after that, it shrunk to less than 20 kilometers. In addition to the warriors, there were not many high-level creatures left on this planet. Mostly, it was weeds, and some crops, bacteria, microorganisms, etc. Following the usual trend, these creatures would die soon, and the life force of this planet would also be completely lost, and it would be completely a dead star. The Great Desolate Army returned with a reward. Almost all the resources that could be moved on this planet had been moved back to Blue Star. John Denver's gaze still lingered. He used the power of the origin and let this ownerless planet undergo acceleration. After less than 1 year, the planet's life would be completely extinct. The diameter also returned to the size when it was just awakened. This time, a strange mass of energy was rising from the interior of the planet, and it seemed to want to escape from here, but John Denver, who had been waiting for a long time, captured it directly with the crystal. This strange energy was the power of the origin generated by this planet. It was just a pity that the level of civilization on this planet was not high. The amount of origin power generated was not much. It was probably only about half a serving. After capturing the power of the origin, the purpose of John Denver's trip was also achieved. His eyes retracted and turned back to the blue star. As instructed by John Denver, martial arts techniques and other secret books were ordered by Xia to be moved back inside the palace. With John Denver's authority, he could take these things directly. It's just that these were not of much use to Blue Star. Therefore, John Denver took them and came to the Planet Association again and was ready to be used for resources or money. Planet Association. In the lobby on the first floor, there was still a busy scene. John Denver came to the same window as last time and the reception staff was also the same as last time. This time, there was no one in line in front of it. John Denver walked straight over, handed over his identity card, and said, "Hello, I want to exchange some items." "Hello sir, what items do you need to exchange?" The young staff member took the ID card and swiped it. Followed by. She lifted her head and looked at John Denver. For this handsome and young man who came yesterday, the young female staff member was naturally impressed. "I want to exchange some martial arts and exercises methods." John Denver took out the martial arts techniques he had plundered from that previous warrior planet and placed it on the counter. There were thick stacks of piles on that planet and it was also built for decades. Naturally, there were many martial arts techniques left. The young female staff member saw so many techniques and gave John Denver a somewhat surprised look and asked, "Mr. Jiang, this is successfully plundered that planet yesterday?" "Yeah." John Denver nodded. There was nothing to hide, one check could tell that. A look of surprise flashed across the young female staff member's eyes. Yesterday, she recommended this planet. Although it was on the verge of collapse, it was a medium martial world. In this martial civilization, there were also internal divisions. There were low martial civilizations, medium martial civilizations, and high martial civilizations. Among them, the powerful high martial civilization had developed to the extreme. They were even able to compete with medium civilizations. It was also not to be underestimated for the newcomers, most of them would choose the low martial world. If it weren't for the fact that he didn't have a better choice yesterday, the female staff would not recommend this planet either. But unexpectedly, the young man in front of her resolved it so soon. Could it be a talented person from any school? The young female staff member muttered something in her heart and then began to check. About 3 minutes later, when she checked it out, she looked up at John Denver, revealed a smile, and said, "There are a total of 31 martial arts and exercise methods here, of which there are 11 books in the unclassified category. There are 15 books of the yellow grade. There are 5 profound rank books. One of them is a middle profound rank sword technique." Hearing the young staff explain, John Denver nodded slightly. Various planets had different levels of civilization because each had its realm, not just in terms of cultivation, this included items, exercise methods, etc. as well. For easier trading of all kinds of planet civilizations, both high-level and low-level civilizations had adopted a uniform level division. From low to high there were 4 levels: yellow, profound, earth, and heaven. Among them, each level was also divided into 3 small levels: high, medium, and low. "Do you want to exchange these martial arts for resources or federal dollars?" the young staff member asked. "Change it to federal dollars," John Denver said. Now, what John Denver wanted the most was iron ore because the blue star was still too small as compared to the previous planet. So, a lot fewer species and minerals were born there. One very important iron ore had yet to take shape, but the price of iron ore was naturally not expensive. The lowest estimate was also 10 million. John Denver couldn't afford it at the moment. According to the theory, items from the outside could not be put directly into the various awakening planets and they must be encapsulated with a crystal ball first. This was true for both living and dead things. These martial arts techniques were not worth the money, a few hundred per book was the most. The yellow and profound grades were a bit more expensive. That profound grade intermediate level sword technique was valued at $200,000. If it was outside, it was estimated to be able to sell even higher. But for one thing, John Denver didn't have that access. Secondly, this was also more work. John Denver did not have that time. It sold for over $500,000. Going to other planets and plundering is the fastest way to get rich. John Denver could not help but sigh. After coming back from the Planet Association, John Denver looked into the awakening space to check out the situation of Blue Star. In the Xia Kingdom, within the capital city of Great Desolation, a great celebration was underway. They celebrated the success of this alien expedition. The generals sang, danced, and were drinking, guessing, and laughing. A piece of cheerfulness was in the air. John Denver found out that Chi stood alone on top of the high platform. With eyes in the sky, there was a blank look in his eyes. Chi was looking at the laughter of the crowd and celebration of the generals at the bottom and there was not much joy on his face. Instead, there was a trace of worry and daze. "Father." Chi looked up at the sky and muttered to himself, "I have already seen the superhuman you mention, and sure enough, very powerful. In terms of individual force, our Xia Kingdom's most powerful warriors are far from their opponents. Although I won today, it also sacrificed the lives of hundreds of soldiers. If there is a day that a more powerful transcendent comes, there will be more, hundreds, thousands. Then how are we going to deal with it?" Chi was very intelligent. In the past, he realized that the blue star under his feet was getting bigger. Now, he also noticed that transcendent were very powerful. It did not seem to be something that ordinary people could deal with. John Denver, who just entered the awakening space, just saw this scene and manipulated the water vapor in the air. The text was displayed in front of Chi. "Your father, Desolation, had similar worries as you did back then." "Father." Chi was thrilled. "Your father's situation was much worse than you are now." John Denver continued to display the text and said, "You should have heard about it. The Desolate tribe had a most difficult period under the oppression of the Barbarian tribe. The Barbarian tribe was so much stronger than the Desolate tribe at that time. But later, why was it the Desolate tribe that ultimately won? It was wisdom." Chi's eyes lit up as he replied, "Back then, Father relied on a wisdom that no one else had, thus he defeated the Barbarian tribe. I've heard my father tell this story, but..." Chi still frowned slightly and said, "The Barbarian tribes were after all not ordinary people, but these are extraordinary people. They were born to exist beyond us. I can't think of a day when I will meet more and stronger extraordinary people. How are we going to win? Just relying on numbers to suppress it?" It must be said that the previous battle with the warriors let Chi see the extraordinary style at the same time. There was also a tremor in his heart for such a powerful individual. If it weren't for the geographical advantage of the valley, even if the opponent was invincible, they must be able to escape. This was hardly something that ordinary human beings could fight against. Those warriors are indeed very powerful. John Denver gathered water vapor and said, "Their strength and speed are more frightening than fierce beasts." "But is the fastest warrior faster than an arrow?" "No, they are not faster than arrows. Our bows and arrows are not much of a threat to them either," Chi replied. The alertness and reaction of the warriors were too strong and a rain of arrows came down. It was also hard to hit a few of them. After a pause, Chi said again, "I know that the current bow and arrow technology has just started, and it does not have enough lethality, but even if it tends to be perfect, it is estimated that it will not be a threat to the powerful transcendent. You have a solidified mind." John Denver reminded, Do you think that ordinary people's weapons cannot pose a threat to extraordinary people? There are weapons that are as fast as sound. Do you think the previous warriors could escape? Same as the sound? Chi was shocked because the speed of sound was almost instantaneous. Immediately replied, if our weapons have the speed of sound, those extraordinary people before will not be able to escape. But a supersonic weapon? Is that possible? He was inspired by questions. Why is that not possible? John Denver said word by word, you think it's impossible, that's because you haven't seen the essence behind the speed. If there are grades in physics, then you're not even a beginner now. Not even a beginner? Seeing these few words displayed by John Denver, Chi's eyes suddenly turned red. He grasped with both hands and his body shook slightly. It was a little hard to believe because Chi was not a proud person, but he also knew the current technology of the Xia Kingdom. Most of them were from him. In terms of technology, no one was stronger than him in the whole Xia Kingdom. This was his pride. Father. With a trembling voice, he said, I know my level of knowledge cannot compare with yours, but for the Xia Kingdom, I have given all my heart and soul. I invented papermaking, printing, the compass, and oil. I also invented the water wheel, the windmill, and the curved plow, textile carts, carriages, ceramics, bricks, and tiles. These are all my contributions. Most of the inventions of the Ministry of Industry are related to me. I feel like I should be on my way to Query. Travel quite a distance. Chi did not dare to directly question John Denver. Instead, he used a large paragraph of words to express his dissatisfaction. So what? John Denver continued to display the text. He felt that it was time to teach this smart child a proper lesson. So what? John Denver's tone was clearly expressed through the displayed text. Do you know why water flows lower and not higher? Do you know why drinking cold water makes you sick and hot water doesn't? Do you know why sound is faster than a bow and arrow? Do you know why coal burns, but the stone doesn't? Do you know why lions and tigers can give birth to offspring, but dogs and cats are not? Also, why are transcendents so much stronger than ordinary people when they are also human? John Denver asked 6 questions in a row to confuse him. These are seemingly natural and taken for granted phenomena. Even if it was someone as smart as Chi, he did not bother to look deeper, but now John Denver asked about it. Chi just realized that the skills he mastered in the past were just appearances and it was not even close to the real scraps. Kinematics. John Denver continued to display the text. It is the discipline of exploring the essential laws of all things in the world. When you figure these questions out, you're a real beginner. After teaching this, John Denver left a completely stunned Chi. The whole person was like enlightenment in the middle of a mist. A new light was found. Originally, after seeing the power of extraordinary people, he was a little anxious. Gradually, he calmed down. He began to seriously think about these few questions John Denver left behind, sitting on top of a high platform all night long. But this era was still the feudal era. Much of this knowledge had yet to be discovered. Chi was even more talented. It was impossible to understand the principle overnight. But this night was the most important turning point in Chi's life. Since then, his focus shifted from the study of technology to the principle of things. As for technology, it was left to others to recruit more talents. It was also to encourage Xia Kingdom's people to go to school. Chi started the imperial examination. Examination there was not like the ancient times in the previous life. There was no examination for the 8 units. There was no need to read the 4 books and 5 scriptures, no poems and songs. In literary politics, there was only one exam. In contrast, there were a lot more disciplines in kinetics. For better research, Chi split the original Keiwu Academy. It was divided into Keiwu Academy and Tiangong Academy. One focused on the study of the laws of the world. One was responsible for the research and development of process technology. If someone wanted to get into both academies, he had to take the science test. Tiangong Academy? John Denver naturally observed Qi's move. Before opening the hospital, John Denver passed on a book to Qi. Tiangong. The author of Tiangong was the ancient great scientist Song Yingxing on the previous Earth. It was the first comprehensive work on agricultural and handicraft production on the former Earth. It was also a comprehensive scientific and technical work in ancient times. Some people also called it an encyclopedic work. Foreign scholars called it the Encyclopedia of Craftsmanship in the 17th century. The entire book contained production techniques for agriculture and handicrafts, such as machinery, brick and tile, ceramics, sulfur, candles, paper, weapons, gunpowder, textiles, dyeing, salt making, coal mining, oil extraction, etc. The book corresponded exactly to the name of the academy. Qi was overjoyed. With this book, he could greatly reduce the detours taken by the Xia Kingdom. Tiangong Kaiwu had since become the treasurer of Tiangong Academy. It influenced generations of students. The evaluation in later generations was very high as compared with Tiangong Academy, which was easier to play a practical role. There were many fewer people who enrolled in Kaiwu Academy. The good thing was that with the strong support of Qi, the development of Kaiwu Academy was very smooth, and the 6 questions John Denver left were hung up high by Qi, and it became the topic of the 2 academies. Qi announced that whoever could answer any one of these 6 questions would directly be awarded the position of professor, and there were high prizes. Qi also set up a Great Desolate Award to reward those who would make significant contributions to these 6 questions each year. With so many initiatives down the line, Qi and the 2 other academies were full of energy. It felt that these 6 questions would be solved soon. However, until the 10th year of the establishment of the 2 academies, someone solved the question. It was the second easiest question. In the Tiangong Academy, a student who had been studying lenses for a long time accidentally produced the first microscope in the history of Blue Star. Before that, glasses, magnifying glasses, etc. were used. All had been invented, relying on this first humble microscope. People discovered the other world that shocked them. Tiangong Academy, inside the laboratory beside a simple microscope, was crowded with many students who came to hear the news. One by one, they stood on tiptoes and looked at the student who was lying on the microscope. 1 hour ago, a piece of startling news quickly spread throughout the academy. Someone based on a magnifying glass made a new instrument, and in this kind of instrument, something was different. Not long after, when everyone heard the news, Qi also hurried over. There was a hint of excitement on his face that was hard to conceal. Over the years, John Denver's 6 questions were not resolved though. But there was a lot of progress. For the second question, there was more or less research and speculation. Many people gave their conclusions, but it was never proven. With the help of a microscope, Qi saw the other world like never before. What are these? Looking inside the lens, one of the tiny objects appeared. Qi was surprised and delighted. It's the same as I guessed before, that such tiny beings exist in this world. The microscope was undoubtedly a major invention. It uncovered the world of microbes. Soon after, cells were also discovered. People had initially opened the door about the creature itself. A new discipline, microbiology, was officially established. Up to this point, regarding the second question raised by John Denver, Qi had a definite answer. Cold water contains harmful microorganisms that are invisible to the naked eye, so people get sick when they drink it, but when the cold water is heated, these microorganisms are killed, and naturally the water becomes fine. Qi solemnly wrote down the answer in his notebook. This year's Great Desolate Award would go to the participant who invented the microscope, and there was no doubt about that. Time went by under the acceleration of the awakening space above the blue star. The years passed calmly and comfortably. 10 years had passed in a flash. Keiwu Academy and Tiangong Academy were secretly competing with each other. A lot of research results were emerging from each of them, but there was no more invention of cross-generational significance like the microscope. The population of the Xia Kingdom continued to grow. Although there was no external threat, they still maintained a huge army. Many people were aware that outside this world, there were also many very powerful civilizations. Everyone there was as powerful as a fierce beast. So, the invasion was possible at any time. Of course, this was the rumor on the street. She also did not bother to dispel the rumors. It was better to have a sense of crisis than none at all. With the help of 2 academies, the weapons of the army had developed rapidly. In particular, many resources were plundered from the warrior planet last time. There were also dozens of tons of iron ore that could be used to make even sharper weapons. The research and development of bows and crossbows was a top priority, especially with the creation of large crossbows. In addition to the weapons, the formation of the cavalry was another priority. Thanks to the superior environment of Blue Star, in the north, a large area of rain-fed grassland was distributed. A large number of wild horses lived there. One with excellent genes could be said to be a tall horse. Following John Denver's instructions, the wild horses of the previous generation had been domesticated. By the time of Chi's generation, domestication was still ongoing. Later, with the help of the academy, domesticating and breeding war horses became much easier and a branch of cavalry was also formally formed. Priority was given to crafting saddles and stirrups as well as bows and crossbows. The level of technology in the Xia Kingdom that day was higher than any dynasty in the ancient times of his previous life. However, it was limited by the lack of many resources and was not yet able to surge. John Denver, who was watching, couldn't help but nod secretly. It was almost comparable to the industrialization level of the previous life. Under gradual development, Chi as the head of a country was aging with each passing day due to the dual management of state affairs and material research. He started to get sick. The medical aspect of the Xia Kingdom hadn't been much developed. Life expectancy was not high at that time. At this point, Chi also had to consider the issue of the successor to the throne. Unlike Desolate, Chi did not marry many wives. Children were also relatively few. They were rarely disciplined and taught at ordinary times. In this kind of situation plus a peaceful environment, Chi's sons were relatively mediocre. None of them stood out above the courtroom. The princes, several of whom each had many supporters. There was no firstborn son succession here. The ministers argued fiercely every day and Chi was also very distressed. He could not tell which one was more suitable to succeed the throne. Chi thought of the first time he saw John Denver at that time. It seems that at that time, John Denver chose the successor for Desolate, so Chi started calling out to John Denver. He was ready to let John Denver decide the next emperor once again. When Chi called John Denver, he naturally noticed it and he was also observing Chi's sons. Chi had few sons. There were less than 20 in total. Among them, 4 also died, only 13 sons left. Among the many sons of this generation of Chi, there was not a single one with outstanding talent like the previous Desolate generation's reluctance. There should be the kind of person who was extraordinary since childhood. Seeing Chi in a difficult decision, John Denver decided to help him out. Of course, he helped mainly for the better development of Blue Star. Today's the Xia Kingdom was still in the feudal era. It would still take a lot of time to develop because technological breakthroughs were not that easy and people's ideas couldn't be changed in a short period. System, help me deduce, among Chi's many sons, who is the most suitable to be the emperor, and who is the most powerful for Blue Star's technological development? John Denver asked. Soon, the deduction results came out. Deduction result: Han has outstanding talent and great perseverance. Han? John Denver raised his eyebrows. He was a little surprised because Han was ranked 7th among many princes. He was weak and sick since childhood and was very unremarkable. He didn't show any special talent. John Denver personally observed Han a few times. He looked ordinary and unremarkable. System: let's deduce Han's talent. John Denver continued to use the system. Deduction result: Han has medical talent. It turned out to be medicine? John Denver suddenly realized his talent in this field, unlike other fields. It wasn't that easy to discover. For example, geniuses in music, literature, art, and even mathematics, physics, etc. It was easy to show from an early age, let people see how special they were. While medicine was of course unlikely. Among the many princes, only this Han has talent. It just so happens that medicine is the weak point of the Xia Kingdom. John Denver thought for a while and quickly made a decision. He informed Qi in the royal study of the results. Han? When Qi saw the text displayed by John Denver, he was a little surprised. Even he could not remember the age and appearance of his son. In the future, I will bring Han over. I'll personally teach him. John Denver left after leaving a message. Thank you, father. Qi was overjoyed. He knew that Han was just an ordinary person or a middle-aged person. Even if he was chosen as the successor, he couldn't be qualified to have John Denver's personal teaching. Since then, in a room next to the imperial study, Han often came there and he accepted John Denver's teachings. Han was honest and there was a hint of wisdom. At that time, as for Godfather John Denver's various miracles, Prince Han was not that surprised. Because Qi muttered to himself in the room sometimes, so Han noticed it, plus the technical explosion in the Xia Kingdom. There were rumors in the palace that Qi was the son of heavens and was blessed by the gods and he can communicate with the gods. Father, this is the drug I made, which saved the lives of many soldiers today. 10-year-old Han was holding a bottle of unknown liquid in his hand, his little face could not hide his excitement. In this era, it was easy to die if someone caught a cold or got hurt and the serious illness was almost incurable. Well done. John Denver applauded. Han was not that smart, but his perseverance was extraordinary. A serving of alcohol for disinfection. After hundreds of experiments, the ratio was finally perfect. This kind of personality is suitable for medicine. John Denver nodded slightly. John Denver's teachings were well determined. He only proposed some basic concepts and then he would let Han test it himself. Qi was also a strong supporter inside Kwu Academy. A small medical research laboratory was established. There was a steady flow of funds and resources. Medical talents were also recruited from all over the kingdom to join the institute. In the following years, the medical research laboratory had gradually achieved results. The first major invention, anesthesia, was developed by Han. This was a historic moment, even in his previous life. Anesthetics was also one of the most important inventions in the history of medicine. Not long after, the second major invention, penicillin, was born. The invention of penicillin greatly reduced the death rate of the Xia Kingdom soldiers. It also made the medical research laboratory famous. Realizing the importance of medicine, he began to consider separating the medical laboratory. 1 month later, after Kwu Academy and Tiangong Academy, the third academy, the School of Medicine was established. Han, who was only 15, was appointed as the headmaster. The Great Desolate Award for the past 2 years, unsurprisingly obtained by Han, who invented anesthesia and penicillin. After Han won 2 consecutive Great Desolate Awards, medicine began to receive unprecedented attention and welcome in the Xia Kingdom, and it was also widely promoted. The medical conditions of the entire Xia Kingdom had risen to a new level. John Denver also gradually reduced his teaching to Han. For John Denver, stealth guidance was the main way, not as a last resort. He was not prepared to be like a stuffed duck and throw knowledge into the people there. The weather is nice today. John Denver, whose thoughts returned to the living room, glanced at the weather outside. There were some white clouds in the blue sky. The Federal Relief House where John Denver lived had one bedroom, one living room, and one kitchen. The total area was less than 40 square meters. It was very cramped. John Denver went to the small restaurant he usually went to, intending to solve his stomach problem. These days, he was busy with the evolution of Blue Star. He didn't even have time to cook for himself. Crackle! The sound of firecrackers suddenly sounded. John Denver looked forward. He saw it by the road, and an oversized firecracker was being lit. A loud sound could be heard from a distance. There were a lot of people around to discuss. Is Old Shoe making a lot of money? Setting off firecrackers for no reason? Making a lot of money? You won't be so happy when you make money. You all don't know. Old Shoe's daughter has awakened an intermediate civilization planet, and she has already been chosen by a level 3 planet master and accepted as a disciple. Fuck? Being accepted as a disciple by the level 3 planet master, the Old Shoe family has handed her over. Old Shoe's daughter will win the college entrance exam. She will be able to get a good result and enter a good university. It would be great if that kid in my family could be accepted as a disciple by the 3rd level planet master. Wake up! Old Shoe's daughter is probably the most talented among us. That's why she's chosen. There were a lot of discussions. John Denver naturally listened. As for the level 3 planet master or something, John Denver didn't pay attention at all. College entrance examination? John Denver recited this term in his mouth. This world also had college entrance exams. If anyone wanted to go to college, the college entrance examination was a must. The university also had a good difference. With the help of the deduction system, John Denver's goal was naturally the top universities. When John Denver returned home, his thoughts entered the awakening space again. His gaze turned to the Xia Kingdom's army. On another planet, unlike John Denver's Blue Star, there were a lot of non-combatants. All of them were martial artists or magicians. All soldiers. John Denver also did not dare to be careless. The number of Xia Kingdom's army was slowly increasing. The Great Desolate Army had also expanded to 30,000 people. Among them, the cavalry force reached 10,000, and they were training desperately every day. In a grassy area, John Denver saw a group of soldiers surrounding and killing a giant elephant. To be precise, it was not an elephant. Rather, it was a product unique to this planet, desolate elephant. A behemoth that combined the characteristics of a mammoth and an elephant was the evolution of the Blue Star. It was roughly the same as the Earth in his previous life, but the details were different. Resulting in, there was a portion of the species that did not exist on Earth. For example, a big guy like a desolate elephant. Another example was some fishes in the rivers and lakes. Against the desolate elephant, soldiers had become very skilled. Swish, swish, swish. One after another, crossbows and arrows flew out and were accurately hitting the desolate elephant. But the desolate elephant was thick-skinned, ordinary bows and arrows couldn't pose much of a threat to it. Huh? John Denver suddenly noticed that among them, one arrow's speed wasn't quite right. Generally speaking, the speed of the arrows was above and below 100 meters per second, but this arrow was obviously much faster than other arrows. It was more than 150 meters per second. John Denver carefully checked it out and discovered that the arrow was repaired and forged by the soldiers who used it. The original arrow was broken and there was no extra iron, so they replaced it with other metals. After all, there was still too little iron ore. John Denver took a closer look at this metal and found out that he didn't recognize it. This is Blue Star exclusive product? John Denver had a preliminary guess in his heart. It was not just the species, but there were also minerals. Blue Star might also have evolved different species from Earth, but because it was buried in the ground, John Denver couldn't find them one by one. For this kind of metal, that could accelerate the bow and arrow, John Denver became interested. After half a day of observation, his face became a little weird. This metal. The more John Denver looked at it, the more he thought. The properties exhibited by this unknown metal were very much like a product of a science fiction work in his previous life. Vibranium. Was it the same thing? John Denver thought about it. He found Xia and let him dig out more of this metal and conduct deep research. If it's true, it'll be interesting. John Denver thought with some anticipation. Due to the speed of time flow, John Denver just went out for a meal. A year had passed on the Blue Star. When John Denver saw Xia again, she was visibly old, not too old, less than 40 years old, but the temples were gray and wrinkled. The whole person had become much thinner. Father. She was very excited to see John Denver. Since John Denver personally taught Han, she never communicated with John Denver again. John Denver told him a sentence. She immediately sent someone to find the soldier. According to the story of the soldier, at a place in the grassland, more of this unknown metal was the dugout. From the appearance, it looked ordinary and was no different from other ores. If John Denver hadn't personally witnessed the uniqueness of that arrow, he probably wouldn't pay much attention. After excavating unknown metal, she dispatched an elite squad to escort it back to the palace. Inside the palace, she had a research room of his own. The unknown metal was sent there. Meanwhile, she also recruited the Great Desolate Army and kept the place under close guard. Even a fly couldn't get out. Although she was old, his brain was not old at all. Knowing that this kind of metal could attract Father's attention was not simple. Father, what is this? She carefully held it and looked at it. Naturally, he did not recognize it. First test is to measure the characteristics of this unknown metal. John Denver didn't say it straight. In fact, John Denver was not completely sure. Vibranium. That was the product of a science fiction movie in his previous life. It was also known as sound-absorbing steel. In the Marvel Universe, it was one of the hardest materials. Specialty resources from Wakanda had been featured in many movies. One of the most famous was a certain Captain's shield and Black Panther's battle suit and claws. Even in the movie, vibranium was also rare. Black Panther's father only sold a small amount of vibranium, and it was enough to send domestic bachelors to study in foreign countries. This made Wakanda a high-tech country, but even if this unknown metal was not vibranium, it should also be very qualitative. She nodded. He personally led the team and performed tests on the unknown metal. In addition to medical and other disciplines, Chi could be said to be an all-rounder. There were certain achievements in most fields. John Denver watched quietly from the sidelines. First, the unknown metal itself was tested for its properties and the results came out soon. This unknown metal could not conduct heat and was very strong, but John Denver was somewhat disappointed because it was not indestructible. It's not vibranium. Seeing this, John Denver already concluded. In the marvelous movies of his previous life, vibranium was very hard, and its special molecular structure made it almost indestructible. As its molecules were relatively stationary, it made it almost non-conductive of heat and kinetic energy. This property allowed it to absorb heat, energy, and kinetic energy. John Denver was not totally disappointed because this unknown metal's hardness was still very high. Someone had to use the hammer dozens of times to smash it. By the next test, John Denver was surprised because this unknown metal could absorb sound and could convert it into its own kinetic energy. Several arrows were built with this unknown metal and soldiers were ordered to come and shoot arrows. After several rounds of testing, he unexpectedly found why the arrow of the unknown metal was so much faster than the ordinary arrow. The main reason was that it could absorb sound. The louder the archer's voice, the faster it would be, and what surprised John Denver was that only the human voice worked on it. With the sound of the tool, there was no such effect. Chi and a few metal scholars next to him were looking dumbfounded with an unbelievable look. Vibranium is also known as sound-absorbing steel. Could it be? This unknown metal is a weakened version of vibranium, John Denver had a preliminary guess. If it was vibranium, then it was hard for John Denver to believe it. After all, this blue star had only just awakened. John Denver felt that Blue Star's talent was higher than that of Earth in his previous life, but it was not possible to give birth to the vibranium thing. If it was a weakened version, that would be more acceptable. Therefore, the next test was the main focus on the characteristics of vibranium. The result was in line with John Denver's guess. This unknown metal could also absorb heat, energy, and kinetic energy to some extent. After getting here, John Denver was almost certain. This unknown metal was the weakened version of vibranium. "Father, please give a name to this metal." Chi's face was full of joy as he asked John Denver for instructions. "Just call it vibranium." John Denver was also too lazy to rename. Since it was so much like vibranium, that's the name. Vibranium? Good name. Chi didn't pay that much attention. As long as it was John Denver, he would naturally agree. The characteristic test of vibranium was finished. Chi then immediately ordered not to leak any information, and then he dispatched his beloved soldiers to the location where vibranium was found. He was planning to explore more vibranium, and the use of vibranium was also on the agenda. The first was the tests of the vibranium. It was relatively simple. Only a few of the most critical properties and attributes were tested, and it had already surprised Chi and several scholars. It was very hard and was absorbing heat, energy, and kinetic energy. It could also absorb the surrounding sound and turn it into potential energy. Follow-up tests continued, whereas soldiers who went to explore the number of vibranium's reserves turned the whole grassland upside down. Ultimately, they found about 100 pounds of vibranium. This quantity was indeed very little, but the connection to the special nature of vibranium was also good. Besides, the area of the current blue star was still a little too small, so the use of vibranium was also on the agenda as it was most obvious. Naturally, it would be used as arrows for bows. As for the rest of it, John Denver did not bother and handed it over to Chi. He checked out the planet panel. Today's blue star was naturally rising further in size with the increase in population. Planet name, Blue Star. Planet level, Level 1. Diameter of the planet, 351.4 kilometers. Planet species, 1,250. Deduction route, none. The diameter had increased a lot. The increase in the number of species was not much, but with this diameter of the planet, John Denver was quite satisfied. Just as John Denver was about to take a short break, the communicator suddenly sounded. There was a notification that someone was requesting communication. John Denver couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. He had been an orphan since he was a child. Usually, he kept a low profile in his class. The communicator of John Denver was more like an ornament. He picked up the communicator and took a look, but it was an unfamiliar number. John Denver thought for a moment, and picked up, "Hello. Hello, classmate John Denver." A familiar man's voice came from the opposite side. John Denver was faintly stunned. He immediately thought about it. Wasn't that the principal Ricky Brown who he met last time? "Hello, principal." John Denver greeted and asked directly, "I wonder why the principal wants to see me?" John Denver had a straightforward temper since he was a child. He was not into nonsense and favors, so he had relatively few friends. "Student John Denver, how is your planet doing?" Ricky Brown said in a gentle tone. "The school is currently making statistics on the situation of each student." "The statistics are?" Ricky Brown paused for a moment and asked, "Do you know about the Jiangqing Grand Tournament?" "Of course, I know," John Denver said. John Denver also inherited the memory of his predecessor. The so-called Jiangqing Grand Tournament. It was an annual event held by the City Lord's Mansion, and the contestants were talented students from various secondary schools. Some people also called it the Jiangqing Genius War. Jiangqing is the most important simulation before the college entrance examination. Not only can you show your strength, but you can also find out some of the basics of the talented students. And Ricky Brown explained, this year's competition is quite special. John Denver didn't say anything, he chose to listen quietly. Ricky Brown couldn't help but be stunned. According to common sense, at this time, John Denver shouldn't ask how special or something like this. As a result, he felt helpless. Ricky Brown could only continue the stand-up comedy, and continued, the rules of this year's competition are still the same as in previous years, with 5 students from each school. That also goes for a number 7 middle school. As per the old rules, to save time, the school will select the top 5 participants directly according to the size of the planet. Come and participate in this competition. So student John Denver, what is the diameter of your planet now? Ricky Brown finished in one breath. The speech was very fluent. 351.4 kilometers. John Denver didn't have anything to hide, he told the truth. 351.4 kilometers? Ricky Brown couldn't help but be slightly taken aback. Half a month had passed since the awakening. During that time, many participants were vigorously developing planets. According to the information that Ricky Brown knew, there were already trainees with the diameter of the planet. It was several times more than when it was first awakened. John Denver broke the record of Chang. The planet was 35.2 kilometers in diameter at the time it was awakened, and it was only an ordinary energy planet, but Ricky Brown still felt that there should be some potential. Unexpectedly, it was not only increased by 20 kilometers, but it was also just over 50 kilometers. Even some intermediate-level trainees couldn't compete anymore. This time, Ricky Brown personally called over and asked. It was because he had expectations for John Denver's planet. After a short silence, he started comforting, "This is not bad, you can add so much to an ordinary planet, it is still relatively comforting." Ricky Brown's words suddenly came to an abrupt end. A few moments later, he seemed to recall something. His voice suddenly became sharp. "What did you say? 351.4 kilometers? Yes, 351.4 kilometers. John Denver calmly said. Clap. John Denver heard from the opposite of the communicator, there was a sound of something falling. A few moments later, Ricky Brown's voice, which was still gentle but seemed to have just watched a horror movie, came, and asked, "Student John Denver, are you sure you awakened an ordinary planet?" "Of course this is certain. I can still distinguish between ordinary energy and extraordinary energy," John Denver said. Good. Ricky Brown realized that his question was a bit inappropriate. Immediately, he snorted. "Principal, my current planet size should be able to rank, right?" John Denver asked. It was awakened for half a month. How were the planets of other students developing? John Denver had no insider access. Naturally, it was not very clear. Ricky Brown just wanted to curse. A 351.4 kilometers diameter planet? And now he was asking should or should not? Earlier, one of the best students in planetary development was only just over 100 kilometers, while John Denver's planet was 351.4 kilometers in diameter. It was extremely demonic. It also broke the record of Chang, but looking at the whole world, Ricky Brown had seen something more exaggerated than this. But now, he saw an extraordinary planet awakened in less than half a month. Ricky Brown heard that some talented students had planets with a diameter of more than 100 kilometers. There were others with more than 150 kilometers. Some students had more than 200 kilometers. But he never heard about someone capable of exceeding 300 kilometers. This could no longer be described with the word monster. It was outrageous. He took a deep breath and regained a sense of calm and said, "Your grade is currently the first among all the students in our school, so you don't have to worry about not being selected for the competition." Selected for competition? John Denver was stunned for a moment, and then said, That. Can I not participate? For John Denver, there was no point in taking part in the so-called competition. He might use the time to improve Blue Star or go to the Planet Association more often to take the task. You don't want to participate? Ricky Brown was also stunned. I'm afraid I don't have much time right now. John Denver found a common excuse. How does that work? Ricky Brown suddenly became anxious because he had a planet over 300 kilometers in diameter. How could he not participate? Immediately, he persuaded bitterly, this year's competition is a bit special than the previous years. The person who stood first will not only get 100 million prize money and a chance to pick a resource crystal from the City Lord's treasury, but he will also get an opportunity for personal guidance from the City Lord. In the last sentence, Ricky Brown strengthened his tone heavily. Our Jiangcheng City Lord is a 5th-level planet master. This is a rare opportunity. He was afraid that John Denver would not agree, so Ricky Brown finally added another sentence. 100 million in prize money? John Denver's eyes narrowed slightly. For John Denver, who was extremely short of money, this was undoubtedly a huge sum of money. As the Blue Star increases in size, the time flow consumes more and more origin power, and the half portion of origin power is estimated to run out in no time. John Denver was thinking inside. If I can get this 100 million before the entrance exam, I shouldn't have to worry about the power of the origin anymore. As for who cares about the personal guidance of the City Lord? For John Denver, it didn't make much sense. After thinking about it, John Denver made a decision and said, well then, if I meet the qualifications, I will participate. Okay, I'll put your name on it right away. Ricky Brown's voice was loud and authentic. In number 7 high school principal's office. After the communication ended, Ricky Brown leaned back in his chair and took a long sigh of relief. He was frightened all his life, but not as much as this month. If it could be said that John Denver's awakening planet, which broke Jiangcheng's record, could be just an ordinary planet, in the end, that would be a surprise for him. 351.4 kilometers? Ricky Brown muttered the number. Immediately, the teacher who was in charge of counting the results of each student was called. A few moments later, the teacher in charge of statistics walked in. He was holding a statistical result in his hand. He handed it over and said, Principal, these are the top 5 students in our school's planetary diameter ranking. Take a look. Good. Ricky Brown picked it up and looked at it a few times. It could be said that this year's result was much better than the previous years. If it was previous years, Ricky Brown would also ask a few more questions about these students, but thinking of John Denver's achievements, Ricky Brown lost interest. He directly crossed out the name of the last student with a pen and added John Denver's name, and said, This is the final list. You are responsible for notifying other teachers. The teacher looked at Ricky Brown's move with some confusion but didn't dare to say anything and left. How nice it would be if this little guy awakened a planet with super energy. Ricky Brown thought with some regret. 100 million. After finishing the communication with Ricky Brown, John Denver recited these words. With that, he entered the awakening space and observed the development of the Xia Kingdom. He had decided to participate in the Jiangcheng competition in half a month, so John Denver naturally couldn't take it lightly. He was planning to be well prepared. Inside the Imperial Palace. Transcendental Research Laboratory. It was late at night. However, in the research room, the lights were still on. Chi and several experts were working all night to conduct practical tests of vibranium. Chi's face was a little tired, but there was still a hint of excitement and eagerness in his eyes. That was yearning for a new field. The air vibrated gently and Chi's body was revived. With that, he flew to another room. With an excited and thrilled expression, he said, Father, how are the experiments on vibranium progressing? John Denver asked. Although John Denver judged that it should be the weakened version of vibranium, Its practical application was not determined yet. We conducted various experiments during this time, and the results are surprising. This metal has all kinds of unimaginable properties. Father, I'll let the soldiers demonstrate. You can see for yourself, Chi said. Chi gave the order, let the soldier take out the weapon made of vibranium, and conduct a field test. First, the arrow was made of vibranium. Father, please look. Chi pointed to the arrow and introduced, this arrow is an alloy made of vibranium and other metal. Compared to just vibranium, it's far from being less effective. Instead, there are also some enhancements. In the previous experiment, we found out that the vibranium was both hammered and beaten in the process. It's not the same as metals like copper and iron. There won't be any losses. Chi's tone became more and more exciting. He was almost dancing with his hands. In front of John Denver, Chi put down the frame of the Emperor, just like a little kid who got a new toy. Then, we combined the vibranium with other metals and beat them into an alloy. Dozens of metals were tested. In the end, the most suitable of these were selected. And was surprised to find out the various properties of this alloy. Surprisingly, it's not weaker than vibranium at all. And even a little stronger. Well done. John Denver complimented, and then asked, how much is the current storage of vibranium? Not many stocks have been found so far. Chi said with some regret, including the last excavation, a total of less than 300 pounds. In the other parts of the planet, I am sending people to search with all their might. The good thing is that it can be made into an alloy and the vibranium will not be consumed. So, it should be able to support an army. After a pause, Chi hesitated for a moment, but still said, it's just. Vibranium has a weakness. What weakness? John Denver asked. Father, see it yourself. Chi ordered the soldiers to start the test. In the middle of the field, a fire was started, separated by a distance of 100 meters, a soldier with a strong body held a bow and arrow. The arrow was an alloy made of vibranium. Only to hear the soldier suddenly shout loudly, he bent the bow and shot. The arrow was like a meteor. It was shooting quickly toward the fire. Now this kind of arrow made of vibranium, used by ordinary soldiers, has a speed of about 150 meters. Chi introduced the concept of numbers and speed. It was already taught by John Denver back in the Desolate Era. Soldiers will be faster if they have a loud voice and a lot of momentum. Atmospheric? John Denver was keenly aware of these words in Chi's words. Yes, this is a new discovery. Chi said excitedly, vibranium is not just able to absorb sound, it seems. It can also absorb everyone's momentum. The more momentum you have, the faster it is. Of course, the increase in momentum is much weaker than the sound. But it also serves some purpose. He ordered the soldiers to shoot bows and arrows. It had already crossed a distance of 100 meters, falling onto the fire. In the next moment, a surprising scene appeared. Just see. This roaring fire suddenly and rapidly went out. Shock absorbs energy such as kinetic and thermal energy from objects. Chi had seen this kind of scene many times, but he calmly said, it's just. Father, look at it. He looked in the direction indicated by Chi. John Denver saw that inside the fire that went out, the arrow had been burned. There was only one arrow left. However, the arrow had also turned black. After absorbing the heat, the vibranium will become like this and become waste. Chi said with some regret. There are no perfect items in the world. However, John Denver didn't care. Instead, he thought. That made sense. In that case, the rest of vibranium will have to be saved. Chi said helplessly. This metal might work wonders against extraordinary people. John Denver was in deep thought. Maybe we can try it? The soldiers in the army of Xia Kingdom had reached 50,000. This was the regular army. If you count the reserves, It was estimated that it could be as many as 100,000 and the population of the Xia Kingdom was only over 1 million. With such a huge army, the economic pressure on the Xia Kingdom was not small. Every day in the courtroom, ministers who didn't know the truth were clamoring for disarmament. Qi just started to make excuses. Later on, they didn't even bother to pay attention to the existence of aliens. Only a small number of people knew about the Qi and the Transcendental Research Laboratory and about the Great Desolate Army. It was strictly confidential so that others had not been informed yet. John Denver also felt that it was not yet time for the world to know. The Great Desolate Army expanded to 30,000 while there were 10,000 cavalries. There was no other way because the formation of cavalry was too costly. The consumption of 10,000 cavalries for 1 year was almost equivalent to 100,000 infantry. Watching the Great Desolate Army sweating like rain in training, an idea came to John Denver's mind. Last time on that warrior planet, the Great Desolate Army was brave, but in front of the warriors, they still couldn't help but feel timid. There is still a need for more realistic combat, and by this kind of training, even hunting and killing fierce beasts every day is useless. Warriors and fierce beasts are not a category after all. John Denver secretly thought. He immediately found Qi and informed his thoughts. The father is preparing to go to the outer planets again? Qi's eyes widened. Instead, a hint of anticipation appeared in his eyes. The greatest challenge that the warriors of Xia Kingdom will face in the future is the transcendence of each planet. John Denver displayed the text and said, and among the transcendents. The gap is extremely large. The warriors you saw last time were just one of the most common ones. If you encounter other more special extraordinary people, one must be more prepared. Hearing John Denver's implicit reminder, Qi also thought of the last time. The Great Desolate Army was victorious in the end, but the performance of each soldier was not as much as it should be. There were quite a few soldiers who saw the warriors flying and disappeared like a figure. They were so scared that they did not dare to act rashly. There were a few soldiers who got the fear of warriors after the battle. Father is right. Qi nodded and said with a serious face, indeed, the generals of the Xia Kingdom did not perform well enough when they were facing the transcendence. They need more hands-on practice. Please help father. Qi bowed deeply. There's no need for that. John Denver manipulated the water vapor writing and said, this is supposed to be my business. Get ready. 10 days later, there will be a new planet passage opening. It's still in the same place. Planet passage was the same each time it was opened. The passage of the Xia Kingdom was located near the Great Desolate City in a mountain range. That day this mountain range had been heavily surrounded, no outsider could get in. The passage was heavily guarded. The training place of the Great Desolate Army was not far away. Thank you, father. Qi still said respectfully. There was a hint of anticipation in his eyes. If it was before, Qi would have anxiety about how to deal with transcendence. But after getting the vibranium, that anxiety was much less. At the very least, vibranium gave him the hope of being able to fight transcendence. After coming out of the awakening space, John Denver left his home. He came to the Planet Association. He was ready to pick a few low-level civilization planets. It was still the same window as last time, and the same good-looking young female staff member was seeing John Denver. The young female staff member's eyes lit up and the smile on her face became a little strong as she said, "Hello Mr. Zhang, what can I help you with today? I want to train the soldiers on my planet, can you check which planets are suitable?" John Denver said. "A planet for training?" After listening to this, the female staff lightly pulled up a panel and said, "If you mainly wanted to use for training, then I suggest using a weaker planet. You can check these out." John Denver looked at the panel. There were various low-level energy planets. After looking at it for a few moments, John Denver's face became a little odd. The topmost slime planet was okay. But below this, What the hell was SpongeBob? Seeing John Denver's gaze fixed on the second planet, the female staff member explained, "On this planet, there is a kind of intelligent creature called SpongeBob. It lives in the deep sea and its combat strength is not strong, so it is very suitable for training." "Since they live in the deep sea, how are they going to fight?" John Denver asked. "They can be lured to the surface to fight and are suitable for training in water warfare." The female staff said, "If you don't think it's appropriate, there are other options here." The female staff pointed to a planet below and said, "This planet is a close relative of SpongeBob, Baby Sponge. Baby Sponge lives on the ground. The strength is not strong either. It's more appropriate as a target for ground combat." John Denver looked at the introduction of the two creatures. Their names were familiar, but they were genuine extraordinary creatures. It didn't look cute at all, so he checked it carefully for a while. Then John Denver made his decision. John Denver's choice was very simple. Among the low-level civilization planets, the warrior planet was the largest. It was also a favorite of various students who had awakened the low-level energy planets because the planet system of warriors was already very mature. As compared to other civilizations, it was relatively simple to create. John Denver first selected 3 planets, respectively: Warrior Planet, Slime Planet, Fierce Beasts Planet. 3 different types of planets. Planet of the Fierce Beasts was a planet ruled by a fierce beast called Red Lion. Red Lion was said to be the descendant of the mythical lion in the advanced Vicious Beast civilization. It's just too far apart because the bloodline was already very weak. As compared with warriors, Red Lion's battle power was even stronger, but the wisdom was relatively low. John Denver was planning to let the Great Desolate Army enter these planets after a month for training. After paying the toll, John Denver glanced at the female staff member and said with some curiosity, "Do you know? Is there an Ultraman planet among the many planets?" "Ultraman planet?" The female staff member was slightly taken aback, followed by a slight frown. After seriously thinking about it, after thinking for a long time, she shook her head and said, "It seems. Never heard of such a planet. Where did you hear about it?" "Then maybe I heard it wrong." John Denver smiled faintly. After returning to the awakening space, John Denver found Chi and told his decision. In the future, the passage will open on the first day of the month. These 3 planets are all extraordinary planets, and they all have unexpected dangers. You must be prepared. The Great Desolate Army is ready. Chi was full of ambition and said, "The Transcendental Research Laboratory has also produced some results recently." "What results?" John Denver became a little interested. This Transcendental Research Laboratory's main purpose was the study of transcendentalists. Last time on the warrior planet, the corpses of the warriors they killed were shipped back and frozen with ice. It was then used for research, but at the very beginning there was no progress. Until later. The establishment of the College of Science and Technology, especially the invention of the microscope, finally made some discoveries. "Father, please come with me." Chi quickly walked to the Transcendental Research Room. Inside the innermost room, the lab was set up. On the laboratory bench, there was a tall warrior's corpse lying there. The body had been dissected. John Denver took a look. "Wasn't that the bald guy?" Chi pointed to the bald man's body and said, "We found that the bodies of these warriors are not much different from our ordinary people, or they were originally ordinary people, but the body possesses a mysterious energy. With this kind of energy, their bodies became so strong. This energy is called true Chi, and it is a kind of extraordinary energy." John Denver coped a little. "So it's called true Chi?" Chi said with some confusion, "And we found out that this kind of extraordinary energy is a bit complicated and not pure enough. So, these warriors cultivate. As the cultivation becomes stronger, there will be hidden problems in the body while cultivating." Speaking of which, John Denver couldn't help but nod slightly. Chi and a group of scholars from the research laboratories still worked hard. Although there were no advanced instruments, but by guesswork and tireless dissection still researched the essential things. The most important thing in this research on warriors is not to see the energy in their bodies, but Chi's eyes were bright, and there seemed to be a glint in his eyes as he said, "It let us know. Even the transcendent was just a type of creature. It also had its drawbacks. Scantling. Not just everything in this world, but also the transcendent. As long as we study the laws of their nature, the transcendent are not that scary." Chi finished in one breath. There was a mixture of confidence and excitement in his tone. "You finally understand. You can start through physics now." Chi was ecstatic in his heart, but his face was restrained, and he pretended to be calm. All along, John Denver's 6 questions, Chi firmly remembered. There was a sigh of relief in his heart, wanting to prove himself. Today, John Denver's approval let him finally feel a sense of accomplishment. "Father." Chi bowed down and requested, "I request to personally lead this outer planet expedition." Last time he was young, but this time he was already over 40. His aging was visible to the naked eye. "No." John Denver refused. Chi suddenly became anxious, and even shouted, "Father! I still have spare power." "That's not the reason." John Denver quickly displayed the text and said, "I have a more important thing for you to do." "Something more important than the conquest of the outer planets?" Chi was a little confused. "I told you once before about weapons that can exceed the speed of sound, do you remember?" John Denver's text was displayed more slowly this time. Chi replied, "Of course, I remember that." Chi won't forget what John Denver said was almost impossible to make. Those weapons could only exist in the imagination. "What I want you to do is related to this kind of weapon." John Denver displayed the text. "Father! You mean? Can that supersonic weapon be made now?" Chi asked with shock and anticipation. "You think it's impossible?" John Denver asked rhetorically. Chi was silent at once. After a while, he said, "Supersonic weapons will be born in the future, but with the current technology and craftsmanship of the Xia Kingdom, it's hard to achieve. Even if it's a bow and arrow made of vibranium. Plus the user factor. The fastest speed today is only just over 200 meters. But..." Chi looked at the place where John Denver displayed the text and had a glint in his eyes and said, "Since it was said by you, then there must be areas that I haven't touched. After all, I even have those 6 questions that Father mentioned. So far, only one of them has been answered. You do know yourself." John Denver also made a joke and said, "You guessed right, this supersonic speed involves the field of." "It is true that you are relatively unfamiliar. Do you know what the speed of sound is?" John Denver asked. "It's probably about 340 meters per second." Chi replied immediately. Since John Denver mentioned the concept of supersonic weapons, Chi was very interested in this. With the establishment of 2 academies, Keiwu Academy and Tiangong Academy, there were many inventions and ideas born. Testing the speed of sound was also in it. After several tests, Chi also measured the speed of the sound. "This is the speed in the air. If it were in the water, it would be a bit faster." Chi added. "So to make supersonic weapons, it must not be an ordinary method." John Denver still displayed the text with water vapor. "Today you are not responsible for supersonic weapons. But it has a lot to do with supersonic weapons. You can say that it's the basis for supersonic weapons. It's kind of a weapon. The power is even greater than that of supersonic weapons." "Greater than supersonic weapons?" Chi was dumbfounded by what he heard. "The name of this weapon, I call it gunpowder." John Denver continued to display the text. "Gunpowder?" Chi silently bookmarked this somewhat unfamiliar term in his head. Gunpowder was the epoch-making invention of the previous world. One could say that its creation would directly end the era of cold weapons. Of course, The history of gunpowder in his previous life had lasted for over 1,000 years. It didn't mature until later. It would be widely used in the military. Here John Denver intended to directly propose this concept and then let Xi go to research and development. Gunpowder's raw materials were not complicated. It was made of saltpeter, carbon, and sulfur in a certain ratio. However, it's also that gunpowder's explosive power was several times different. For a considerable time in ancient times of his previous life, the so-called gunpowder was simply a mixture of charcoal, sulfur, and nitrate. The ratios were varied, it was a loose mixture and it was not resistant to storage and transportation. It was susceptible to moisture, impurities, and less power. The actual power of the gunpowder when it exploded had a lot to do with the purity of raw materials, preparation process, compression, and sealing conditions. Until later, with advances in physics, chemistry, and mechanical engineering, people would discover the best combination ratio of gunpowder, which was sulfur 10%, charcoal 15%, saltpeter 75%. Of course, John Denver naturally wouldn't tell Xi directly about this ratio. According to the current level of technology, Xia Kingdom was in a position to be able to study this optimal ratio. Saltpeter, carbon, sulfur? Hearing these three raw materials mentioned by John Denver, Xi was instantly enlightened. Xi was naturally no stranger to these three substances. There were already people using it in the Xia Kingdom. That was the same fireworks as in his previous life. But even Xi didn't expect that. The supersonic weapon that had been on his mind was hidden in the daily necessities. Aren't these raw materials used for fireworks? But the power of fireworks is not that great. Xi secretly thought, then it should be a matter of ratio. During the time Xi had been researching vibranium and alloys made from various metals, it was very clear that the ratio of each metal was just slightly different, while the difference in effect would be huge. "Father, I have a preliminary idea in my mind." Xi leapt forward and said. "Go on then." John Denver smiled faintly. He also probably guessed that Xi should have thought of the ratio problem. Must say, Xi's scientific talent was extremely outstanding. He ended the exchange with John Denver. Xi immediately assembled a team at the fastest speed to develop gunpowder and was personally in charge. The location was within the Imperial Palace. During development, everyone else had to stay inside except Xi. The outside was guarded by heavy troops, even a fly could not get in easily. At the same time, Xi also set up the lead candidate for the expedition to the outer planets. There were no surprises. Naturally, it was Han who was chosen by John Denver, and for this expedition to the outer planets, all aspects were well prepared. Along with the army, a 10-person transcendental research team was prepared, that would accompany the Great Desolate Army and personally travel to the outer planets to study the transcendent creatures of each planet face to face. Compared to the Great Desolate Army, John Denver's eyes were more on this 10-member transcendental research team. Among the 10 people, there were men and women of all ages. Each one was a scholar, even half of them won the highest honor of the Xia Kingdom, the Great Desolate Award. Accompanying the transcendental research team there were also piles of various instruments, all kinds of microscopes, telescopes, reagent boxes, etc. Nothing was very advanced, but that was the highest skill item that could be produced in this era. The last outer planet conquest was years ago. Since then, many soldiers of the Great Desolate Army had been discharged. Most of them were newly selected soldiers, so a look of nervousness and anticipation was on their faces. To ensure that this outer planet conquest would satisfy John Denver, Xi had done a lot of work privately, including a lot of simulation training, as well as very critical thought work and related science knowledge. Not so many soldiers liked that last time. Seeing a warrior was a wimp in the heart. The first planet passage John Denver chose was naturally the warrior planet. Let these people from Blue Star get familiar with it first. Is this an alien planet? The people of the Transcendental Research Team looked at this martial planet with a look of curiosity. They picked up the binoculars and looked around. This time, John Denver chose a low-level world. There were not many survivors on the planet. There were less than 50 people and their strength was also much weaker. For better training and research, the Great Desolate Army did not directly swarm. Instead, the team was divided into several branches. Over and over again. Let each team go up to meet the enemy. To achieve the purpose of training, the Transcendental Research Team followed behind and watched carefully. Earlier in the laboratory, only cold corpses were studied. There was nothing like such an intuitive and shocking observation from a real person. Is this an extraordinary one? It's really powerful. To be precise, this is a warrior, a class of extraordinary people. Do your research, don't discuss this. After the first surprise, the Transcendental Research Team and the Great Desolate Army were not as fearful. A portion of the warriors was killed and another part of the warriors was captured alive. On the warrior planet, all of them were the same human being. Their strength was not strong either. The Great Desolate Army lost almost nothing. The second planet. The low-level civilization of Slime Planet was not so simple. At the very least, this was a relatively rare civilization. Its strength was also stronger than the first warrior planet. When seeing a slime for the first time, the eyes of the people in the Transcendental Research Team and the Great Desolate Army were wide open. Some of them could not believe it. Appearing in plain sight, it was a jelly-like or semi-liquid-like monster. The appearance was very ugly and the face was also rather grim. John Denver was also observing the slimes. They were not cute. In addition, they were highly aggressive. As soon as the Great Desolate Army came in, they immediately lunged viciously. The Great Desolate Army, which had been refined by the warrior planet, did not panic. They set up a formation and the arrows were immediately shot out. For this expedition, no sound-absorbing arrows were brought. After all, the amount of vibranium was too small, it had to be sent out at a critical moment. However, what surprised the Great Desolate Army as well as the Transcendental Research Team was that on these soft-bodied monsters the arrows did not work. Even if it was a lance, after stabbing, it also slipped right off. The people of the Great Desolate Army were greatly alarmed. Fortunately, the Great Desolate Army had thick and large shields that blocked the way of these soft-bodied monsters. The Great Desolate Army was not lost. Phew! Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. To see all the extraordinary performance and characteristics of these soft-bodied monsters, the Great Desolate Army decided to temporarily build a temporary fortification. The Great Desolate Army began to test step by step. They attracted the soft monster to attack so that the extraordinary research team behind them could observe their various properties. The first character was easy to spot. The intelligence of these soft-bodied monsters was not high but it was not too low. The same tricks could not be reused like the warrior planet. To thoroughly understand all the properties of these soft monsters, the people of the Great Desolate Army had to stay there for a full month. There was an adventurous slime. More than that, they were caught alive and placed in a cage as a research item. The Transcendental Research Team gathered around the cage, watched, and discussed them with interest. Taking advantage of this, the Transcendental Research Team roughly figured out Slime's bottom line. Slimes are sticky and are a type of soft-bodied creature. The leader of the Transcendental Research Team, an elderly scholar who had won the Great Desolate Award, wrote down preliminary conclusions in his notebook. The body is opaque or translucent. The exterior color usually tends to match the local survival environment, similar to chameleons, and is more protective of itself. It can change into various shapes. They tend to crawl on the ground, the stone walls and the top. Preliminary, they belong to omnivorous creatures. There are different temperaments. Some are extremely vicious and extremely aggressive. Some are more gentle. The attack is more powerful. But the methods are simpler. Due to the softness of the body, it is flexible and can make jumping attacks. The reproduction method is split or fusion. Its weaknesses. Slime's weaknesses. The pen in the hand of the older scholar paused for a moment, then he continued, afraid of salt and fire. Especially afraid of salt and liquids containing salt. Just at the beginning, the Great Desolate Army could only take a defensive position. Later, they learned more and more about slime, then the idea of attacking with salt suddenly came up. They were all slimy creatures, salt should also have an effect, right? As a result, it surprised everyone. These seemingly terrifying and ugly supernatural creatures were really afraid of salt. Once they knew this, it would be easy. The team immediately formulated one type of brine after another. They experimented. At last, the most suitable formula was found. They just had to splash it on the slimes and slimes could be seriously injured very quickly. In the end, it was a transcendent creature, it wouldn't die that easily. To kill it completely, it must be ignited with fire. First, they needed to splash the prepared special salt water, then they had to use fire. 2 steps, 1 down, no slime could resist that. 1 month passed, more than 60 slimes on the slime planet were wiped out. Most of them were killed to make specimens. A small number were captured alive to bring them back to the blue star. This species is essentially also a soft-bodied creature. The extraordinary research team finally concluded, if there is no extraordinary energy on this planet, we will soon return to ordinary soft-bodied creatures. The slime planet encounter, study, and the response of transcendental creatures was a pretty rare experience for the Great Desolate Army and the Transcendental Research Team. Everyone was starting to get the hang of it. All were aware, even if it was a transcendent creature. It also had its weaknesses, they just needed to look for it. There was a way to fight. Mentally, they were not so scared anymore. But there were also a small number of soldiers who had never been able to adapt in their hearts. It was like the symptoms of deep-sea phobia and dense object phobia. Some people were naturally more afraid of things like wild animals. For those soldiers, Chi made an immediate decision. He transferred directly out of the Great Desolate Army. He also selected new soldiers to come in. After the journey to the second planet was over, enthusiasm was high throughout the Great Desolate Army. The Transcendental Research Team was also excited for the next journey. Inside the Imperial Palace, Chi was fully engaged in the development of gunpowder at the same time. He did not forget to pay attention to the matter here. It was very eye-catching. He was trying to ask John Denver again, but after thinking about it, he still gave up. After a month of recuperation, the third planet passage was opened. 30,000 warriors of the Great Desolate Army and the Transcendental Research Team embarked on a new journey. This time, the Transcendental Research Team had expanded to 15 people. The original 10 people were indeed a little less. Chi was also sending extra manpower because the third planet was also a low-level civilization planet. Above the planet, there lived a terrible and fierce beast. Red Lion. It was said to be the blood descendant of a fierce beast of the advanced civilization planet, mythical beast. This was one of the most powerful planets in terms of strength. The situation of each planet. John Denver did not inform Chi in advance about the situation of each planet. If Chi was informed in advance, it would reduce the value of the training. After the experience of the first few times, as soon as the Great Desolate Army stepped into the planet, they immediately took a defensive position. First, make a good fortification. Subsequently, only then would the scouting team go out and carefully check out the situation. This planet. Why does it give me a sense of danger? It's a little like the situation before I met a ferocious beast in the southern rainforest. A female scholar surveyed the planet's environment and said with some uneasiness, "I'm feeling this too." Others also agreed. It was not just the research team, the soldiers of the Great Desolate Army who had a sharper sense of danger, All of them raised their alertness. Roar. This time, there was a huge beast roar in the distance. It could be heard far and wide. A few moments later, a few soldiers in charge of scouting scrambled back in a panic. There was a look of horror on their faces, but what was surprising was this: no fierce beasts were chasing after them. Han, the leader of the Great Desolate Army, immediately sent people to pick up these soldiers. Wait for these soldiers to recover, everyone asked. Only then did they find out. Several people encountered a tall, fierce beast that looked like a lion. The height was nearly 3 meters. The whole body was covered with thick crimson hair. There were also a pair of sharp fangs in the mouth. With one jump, it could easily cross the length of 10 meters. What these soldiers encountered was a crimson beast that was dozing off, and they awakened each other. Then they ran away in fear, but what made them a little confused was that the beast just roared, but it didn't chase after them. It seems that the transcendent creature of this planet should be this crimson fierce beast. The older scholar analyzed the experience from the previous planets. Let everyone understand that on this planet, the high probability was that there would be only one kind of transcendental creature. Like other plants and animals, they were also present, but nothing special. This was also an innate limitation of the low-level civilization planets. Plus, there were not a lot of transcendental species on a planet without an owner. If it was an advanced civilization, then there could be far more than one kind of transcendental creature. This beast may be different from the warriors or slimes we encountered before. The old scholar glanced at everyone and said solemnly, "So, everyone must pay special attention. Don't make the mistake of empiricism. First, let's figure out what this beast really is." With the awareness of the dangers that existed on this planet, everyone frowned for a while. It was completely different from the previous planets. The crimson beasts that existed here actually didn't take the initiative to attack. This made it very difficult for the Great Desolate Army. If they were allowed to go out and find it, I'm afraid it would be dangerous. If there were too many people, the beast could escape. If there were too few people, it was easy to be broken down individually. In addition, in the wild, it was the home field advantage of the beasts. Without the help of defensive fortifications, the Great Desolate Army could also face huge casualties. For the time being, no action was taken. They sat down and held a meeting for discussion. After some intense debate, finally, a suggestion came from a scholar on beasts, and it was accepted by most people. Beasts, especially large beasts like lions and tigers, generally have a strong sense of territory. The scholar who studied beasts said, in each area, unless there is an unexpected situation, only one large beast exists. So, I guess the unknown crimson beast is here. It should also have that nature. If that's the case, it would be much easier. The older scholar spoke up. Then let's start with a strategy based on a judgment. Han, who had been listening silently, made a decision. The Great Desolate Army immediately formed an elite squad. There were only 100 of them, but all of them were the elite of the elites. Each wore the most advanced bow and crossbow. This crossbow was the latest product of Tiangong Academy. Even without the use of sound-absorbing arrows, it also had a super high speed of over 120 meters per second. The scholar who studied the beasts gave a final warning and said, "The alertness of the beast is extremely high. I'm afraid it can't be compared to the warriors or slime from earlier. You guys, be sure to be careful." The elite squad set off. With the disappearance of 100 soldiers, everyone's hearts began to rise. After about an hour, the figure of the soldiers reappeared. This made everyone breathe a sigh of relief. 100 people were back in one piece. The leader of the squad reported this discovery to the research team. "The Crimson Beast is less than a kilometer away from us." The captain said quickly, "It lives in a cave." It's the same as what Fang's scholar said. We're within a 5-kilometer radius. None of the traces of other beasts were seen, and the alertness is very high. We didn't get much closer. It was found out. However, the weird thing is that this crimson beast just walked out of the cave and glanced at us, and then it went back again. After listening to the captain's statement, there was a strange look on everyone's face. This was indeed very strange. By the book, large beasts had a very strong sense of territory. Once there was a foreign invasion, they were bound to be attacked. Not to mention the little human beings. Let's study the strategy, and continue to send teams out to investigate tomorrow," the old scholar said. Several days after the squad was sent out to investigate the habits and way of life of this crimson beast. The results were also passed one by one. The first was the distribution of beasts on this planet. There were 75 of them. There were both males and females, young and old. Adult male beasts had their separate turf. To everyone's surprise, the first crimson beast liked aggression. It was not an exception, this was true of all crimson beasts. Although the planet had gradually lost its vitality, the number of plants and animals was very small. Food sources were lacking, but some crimson beasts would rather starve than come out of their caves. What a strange habit! The scholars were very puzzled. As the investigation progressed, the reason for this habit was also explored by everyone a little bit. So, although this kind of beast is tall and mighty, it doesn't like moving? The results of the survey also surprised everyone. They like to be alone in a cave? Even able to stay out of action for a month? John Denver saw this. He couldn't help but think of another similar creature in his previous life. Houseman. After the basic habits were clarified, the next plan was ready. The Great Desolate Army began to hunt down the crimson beasts. Taking advantage of the fact that crimson beasts did not like to come out of their caves and the characteristics of low intelligence, they laid a trap outside the cave, then lure the crimson beast out. This crimson beast liked to be quiet and did not like to move, but that didn't mean it was not offensive. After being provoked continuously, a roar of anger came from the cave. Then it swooped out of the cave. Then it fell into a big hole in the ground. The crimson beast was very powerful. Defense, stamina, endurance, agility, etc. were all substantially more than the warriors and slimes that they encountered before. But now they were trapped in the big hole plus the siege of so many soldiers. In the end, it still fell. Puff! A soldier stabbed his lance viciously into the weak spot of the crimson beast's body. A stream of blood spurted out and splashed on this soldier's hand. Ah! The soldier suddenly let out an extremely painful scream. The screams of misery resounded through the sky, and it was incredibly painful. Everyone else was taken aback. All of them turned around only to see the left hand of this soldier. The location where the blood of the crimson beast was splashed was seen to have been splashed by sulfuric acid. At a speed visible to the naked eye, rapid ablation happened. They saw the white bones in an instant, and the bone couldn't stop it. It even directly dissolved, and soon, a crack sounded. His forearm broke directly, but it was not over yet. Even the upper arm started to melt rapidly. People who saw it were terrified. Quickly cut off his arm. A scholar who came with the team hurriedly shouted. The captain next to him also reacted and drew his long sword. With one slash, the soldier's arm was cut off. The soldier immediately fell unconscious. Affected by this unexpected event, everyone's mood was not too high. The group returned to the base camp and informed the others of the incident. After hearing about the blood of the crimson beast, the members of the research team looked surprised. Is the blood of this beast poisonous? One scholar speculated. Most likely. Another scholar nodded in agreement. Even though it sounded unbelievable, this was a transcendent creature. Naturally, it was much more special than ordinary beasts. Soon, the crimson beast that had just been killed entered the dissection table. Its blood became the focus of research. After a little research, the research team initially figured out the situation. The blood of the crimson beast is highly poisonous. The old scholar performed the operation himself and then reported to Han, "Its poison is far more terrifying than the poison of any creature we have ever seen. This poison contains extremely strong solubility. Investigate the cause. We found it in the blood. A special kind of energy. It should be the transcendental energy of this planet. That's what makes the blood of the Crimson Beast so terribly poisonous." After hearing this, Han nodded slightly. He was currently the most accomplished person in Xia's medical field. He naturally understood these things. "Keep researching for more discoveries." Han gave the order. In addition to the blood, the other parts of the body of the Crimson Lion were also quite special, but they were without the special blood. After understanding the characteristics of the Crimson Lion, Han gave the order to harvest. The great desolate army began to move and surrounded the Crimson Lions separately in each area. The wisdom of these Crimson Beasts was not very high. Naturally, they would not go to inform other companions or work together. It led to a smooth operation for the Great Desert Army. After 3 days on this planet, all the Crimson Lions were captured because the blood of the Crimson Lions was precious. So, Han gave the order to try to capture it alive. Most of the Crimson Lions ended up being captured and transported back to Blue Star. The conquest of the 3 transcendent planets came to an end. John Denver decided to let the Grand Desolate Army rest for 3 months. During this time, they could digest the previous things well. The Transcendental Research Team, on the other hand, was put into a busy research schedule as soon as they returned. In order to get the research results faster, Xi immediately upgraded the Transcendental Research Laboratory to the Transcendental Institute. That was the Xia Kingdom's first research institute. It was specially dedicated to study the transcendent creatures, and some key elites were drawn from the 2 colleges and all over the kingdom to join the Transcendent Research Institute. With more people joining, research on the blood of the Crimson Lion was progressing rapidly. Soon, everyone found an unexpected result. That was, this blood was not just effective for people, but it was also effective against warriors and slimes. Crimson Lion's blood is able to corrode and dissolve the transcendent energy possessed by other transcendent creatures, and even warriors and slimes can't stop it. She excitedly reported the result to John Denver. "So, we can make a whole new kind of weapon. Biological weapons." John Denver reminded him. She was stunned for a moment and then suddenly said, "Biological weapons? Yes, the wisdom of the Father is really great." John Denver immediately interrupted Chi, "Continue talking." She took a deep breath and said, "My idea is to use the Crimson Lion's blood to make biological weapons specifically for use against transcendent." "It works." John Denver left with 2 words. The teachings were becoming less and less. After John Denver left, she slapped his head violently and said, "Biological weapons? Why didn't I think of it? This sounds like a very powerful thing." With a hint from John Denver, biological weapons were developed very late in his previous life. Subsequently, on the conquest of the outer planets, biological weapons would bring about an astonishing and terrifying impact. Meanwhile, another terrible weapon that does not belong to this era, gunpowder, was also a breakthrough. Gunpowder's raw materials were not complicated. It was composed of saltpeter, carbon and sulfur in a certain ratio. But to make it into explosives was not that simple. In his previous life, it had developed for a long time. Until very much later. It was only then that the high-powered explosives were manufactured for use as conventional weapons. As for the reason, the main problem was the ratio. Inside the Imperial Palace, next to the lab, it was all under siege. Near it was a deserted courtyard that was used as a test site. The first batch of finished gunpowder was shipped here. The eyes of everyone involved in the research were filled with anticipation and excitement. Today, they might witness the birth of a terrible weapon. John Denver was also watching silently. As the person who paid the most in research and development, She personally lit the fuse. A few moments later, a heaven-shaking sound like thunder sounded out of nowhere. It shook the sky. It could be heard far and wide. Those who were close, their ears were almost deafened by shock. Seeing this scene, John Denver nodded slightly. This test was quite successful. It was not the perfect ratio, but it was also lethal enough. The crowd was very excited, only Chi looked calm. He didn't seem to be satisfied yet. The power that father spoke of seems to be quite lacking? Chi thought to himself. Up next, Chi did not relax his work on the improvement of gunpowder. He continued to grasp it personally, and in the midst of this test, Chi seemed to have caught a little inspiration. Father, I probably know what you mean by supersonic weapons. Chi was alone and standing on a high platform. He was looking at the sky and was muttering. At the moment of the explosion, the separation speed of the gunpowder's particles. Isn't it faster than the speed of sound? If one can make the gunpowder smaller, and if the power remains the same, wouldn't it be a supersonic weapon? Unfortunately, there was no response from John Denver this time. John Denver felt a little pity. Chi's talent was rare for 100 years. In John Denver's opinion, he was born in the wrong era. In this era, Xia Kingdom was still in the initial stage of technology. Many concepts and many disciplines were also not present. If Chi was born 100 years later, a great scientist would appear in the future. Chi's improvement and research on gunpowder and John Denver's training program continued. He came to the Planet Association. John Denver bought the passes for 5 transcendental planets in one go. These 5 planets were stronger than the last 3. They were more difficult to deal with. Time rushed by and a year passed quickly. Above the blue star, everything was changing all the time. The gunpowder research led by Chi was advancing little by little, and the Great Desolate Army's planetary conquest was finally over. The transcendental research team that followed the army increased to a team of 50 people and was subdivided into several teams to target all kinds of transcendental planets. During this 1 year of the conquest, on the next few stronger planets, the Great Desolate Army also began to suffer casualties, but the gains far outweigh the losses. The momentum of the soldiers of the Great Desolate Army was becoming more and more formidable day by day. Facing transcendental beings, they were not only afraid, their eyes even shone like a hungry wolf. The cavalry also came in handy. Paired with infantry. On certain occasions, it played an extremely important role. So far, the training of the low-level civilization planet came to an end. Next, it was the turn of the intermediate civilization planet and the advanced civilization planet. John Denver didn't plan to train a lot in these 2 types of transcendental planets. After all, the planets that most people awakened were low-level civilization planets. Intermediate and advanced were still in the minority. As for the intermediate civilization planets, John Denver chose 3 of them. From advanced civilization planets, 2 were chosen. As for super civilizations, that won't be necessary. Time went on, another year passed. The Great Desolate Army had become more mature. Intermediate civilization planets and advanced civilization planets were not hard to beat. The role of the Transcendental Research Team in this was very big. Many seemingly tough opponents. It was all because the research team found a way. Some strange weapons were also invented. At night, in the Imperial Palace, on top of a high platform, Chi came here alone again and was looking at the sky. In these 2 years, Chi was exhausted. He was in charge of the research and development of gunpowder. He was also busy with the conquest affairs of the Great Desolate Army. It was obvious to the naked eye that he had aged a lot. The air swayed. John Denver appeared. "Father." Chi was overjoyed. "You have some questions, right?" John Denver formed the words with fireflies this time and said, "In these 2 years, why did I make you do so many things?" "Father seems to be preparing for something very important." Chi expressed his thoughts. It's not really important. John Denver continued to use fireflies to draw words. It's about honor and rewards. Can I know? She asked. John Denver gently stroked one of the fireflies and said, "This is a competition between planet masters. Many planet masters are participating. It's about the life of every planet. The winner will win honor and awards. The reason I have trained the Great Desolate Army continuously for the past 2 years is in order to win the contest." Looking at John Denver's firefly text, Chi's eyes were pale, but they were getting brighter. "I understand, Father." Chi knelt down on one knee and said solemnly, "I know I'm old, but I still have courage in my heart. Please allow this battle of honor to be led by me personally." "Okay." John Denver didn't have any consideration. He agreed to Chi's request. In John Denver's opinion, Chi didn't have much time left. He didn't want to leave with regrets. Under the time flow rate specially set by John Denver, 2 years in Blue Star were half a month outside. This day was the day of the big competition that Tong Zhencheng said. John Denver got up early in the morning and had a simple breakfast. After that he headed for school. This world also had public transportation, but John Denver had been frugal since he was a child. There was no such thing as spare money. He had been running to and from school. He entered the school. On the side of the playground, John Denver heard a cry. "John Denver, over here." John Denver turned his head to look. He found out that it was a male classmate in the same class, Sullivan Nesby. Sullivan Nesby's last awakening was also good. Both parents were planet masters. The family was quite well off. Therefore, this time, he was also selected for the 5-person school team. John Denver and Sullivan Nesby were not familiar with each other. They only knew each other. In fact, John Denver didn't have much friendship with his classmates, and next to Sullivan Nesby, there was another square-faced boy standing there. John Denver did not recognize him, but he knew that this was also one of the 5 selected. "You're early." John Denver said hello. "No way." Sullivan Nesby spread his hands and said, "I heard that the leading teacher this time is Glenna Sorensen. If I'm late, won't I be severely lectured?" Glenna Sorensen? John Denver did have some impression of this name. Speaking of which, another student came by, but it was Jared Fry, who ranked 3rd in the last awakening score. Jared Fry nodded slightly towards John Denver and the others, then stepped aside. He did not participate in the chat. "This guy is really arrogant." Sullivan Nesby muttered softly. "Maya Harris's awakening results are very high even in the entire River City. Coupled with the efforts of his family, it is said that the diameter of the planet is already close to 100 kilometers. The square-faced boy said. "Almost 100 kilometers? No wonder he's not with us." Sullivan Nesby said. Immediately, they seemed to realize something. After turning around, his eyes suddenly lit up. He tugged on John Denver's clothes and said, "Look, Maya Harris is here." John Denver and the square-faced boy also turned their heads. He saw a beautiful figure walking over. She was tall and slender, and her looks were not bad. Not Maya Harris or who? Maya Harris walked up to the 3 of them. "Maya Harris, I heard that your planet has now exceeded 100 kilometers in diameter?" Sullivan Nesby asked. Maya Harris gave a soft Her eyes stopped on John Denver for a while. Then she calmly walked to the side. For Maya Harris, John Denver had just awakened an ordinary planet. He was no longer the target she cared about. A few more minutes passed and a tall figure appeared and walked towards the 5. This was a tall, middle-aged man with a cold face. "Teacher Chu." Sullivan Nesby and the square-faced boy immediately shouted. Glenna Sorensen nodded slightly, glanced at the 5 John Denver, and said loudly, "This time in the Jiangqing competition, our school will be led by me. The 5 of you are the best 5 in thousands of people in the 7th school." But Glenna Sorensen's voice turned cold as she said, "Compared to the geniuses in other schools, it's not even close. This time in the grand competition, among the 5 of you, only Maya Harris has a chance to qualify. The rest of you have no chance." After hearing, Jared Fry, Sullivan Nesby and the square-faced boy all three clenched their fists slightly, except for John Denver. Their heart was not satisfied. Although Maya Harris was excellent. But why are they not the best students of number 7 high school? Who would be willing to submit to others? John Denver didn't care. He just wanted to hurry up and participate in the grand competition, quickly resolve the battle, get the reward. Then go home and continue evolving the planet. In short, make it quick. Sullivan Nesby and Jared Fry all clenched their fists, but no one dared to speak up in defense. Because this Glenna Sorensen was a 4th-level planet master like the principal Ricky Brown. Even in the entire Jiangcheng, he was also a famous powerhouse. "I know you're not convinced." Glenna Sorensen glanced at the 5 of them with cold and stern eyes, and said, "But this is the truth. If you want to be disobedient, speak with your strength. All right, now, follow me." After saying that, Glenna Sorensen took the lead, turned around and walked out of school. John Denver and the others followed. The 7th school naturally took the competition very seriously, and they specially prepared a rune car. No one or thing was allowed to fly in Jiangcheng. A rune car from the rune planet of the intermediate civilization, due to the low price, it was convenient and fast, had become the most popular means of transportation. It's fast, it's comfortable, and doesn't smell oily. John Denver felt something. It felt much more comfortable than the car in his previous life. The grand competition was held at the largest venue in Jiangcheng, Jiangcheng Center Stadium. Outside the venue, there were already media reporters who had arrived in advance, but because the participants were all high school students, the competition banned all media access and interviews. The rune stopped outside the venue and Glenna Sorensen walked in with the 5 people. There was a staff at the door to check the identity, to prevent irrelevant people from sneaking in. After passing successfully, Glenna Sorensen glanced at the time, turned his head and said to the 5 people, "There is still some time before the opening of the grand competition. You can find a place to rest by yourself first." After saying that, Glenna Sorensen walked straight to a lounge on the left. John Denver and the other 5 were left behind. Maya Harris and Jared Fry each walked towards one side. The square-faced boy seemed to have met someone he knew and followed him to the other side. "John Denver, let's go over there." Sullivan Nesby pointed to a group of people not far away. They seemed to be students chosen from a high school. Among them, there were 3 girls. They were all young and beautiful. 3 pairs of long legs. It was very eye-catching. Sullivan Nesby's eyes lit up. John Denver couldn't help but complain. "You can go ahead, I'll find a place to sit." John Denver was not very interested. The venue was huge, there were lots of seats. John Denver found a random place and sat down. "All right." Sullivan Nesby could only follow John Denver and sit down. Inside the spacious lounge, there were many leading teachers from Jiangcheng Middle School and they were all chatting with each other. The arrival of Glenna Sorensen was welcomed. "It's Yun Fei. Glenna Sorensen is here. I didn't expect that you would be leading the team at your school this time. Can we not pay attention to it? This year's class is full of geniuses, and even the city lord attaches great importance to it." A teacher came up to say hello and greeted each other. Glenna Sorensen nodded as a response. "I heard that your school has produced an incredible genius this time, awakened a high-level energy planet and is expected to enter the top 10 of this competition." A third middle school teacher who was familiar with Glenna Sorensen said. "You mean Maya Harris?" Glenna Sorensen's face was calm, and he said, "He does have hope of entering the top 10 of the competition. But He is the only one in our school who is expected to qualify. It's your third middle school. There are several main players. I'm afraid it can occupy several places in the top 32. Yeah. A teacher next to him interjected, especially Ian Brime of your third middle school. The planet that was awakened at the beginning was more than 30 kilometers and now it has crossed 100 kilometers. It is very possible to win the championship. Winning the championship? That's too exaggerated. Although Ian Brime is good, it's not his turn to win the championship. With Ian Brime's strength, he is likely to be in the top 3. As for the champion, there is no part for him. The surrounding teachers heard the words winning the championship. At once there was fierce opposition. The teacher of number 3 middle school was not angry, but nodded and said, with the one from number 1 middle school, it would be good for Ian Brime to be in the top 4. That's right, the one in the middle school is too monstrous, far more than the others. Other geniuses can only compete for the runner-up at most. In the ownership of the championship, among the numerous teachers in the lounge, a rare agreement was reached. Okay, it's almost time, let's go back and lead the team first. An old teacher reminded. Outside, with the arrival of more and more teams from various schools, the venue was also becoming more and more lively. Many people gathered together. Discussions sounded everywhere. Look! Sullivan Nesby pointed to a team at the entrance and said, that's the team from number 2 middle school. The one walking in the middle is the genius of number 2 middle school whose planet was over 30 kilometers in diameter when he awakened. Following the direction of Sullivan Nesby's finger, John Denver looked over and saw the genius of number 2 middle school. It was a tall boy and his face was quite mature. Surrounded by the people, he walked into the stadium at a long and fierce pace. Graham Ellicott. It's Graham Ellicott from number 2 middle school. Is that the strongest student of number 2 middle school, the super genius with a planet diameter of 31.2 kilometers when he awakened? That's right, it's him. The top 3 contenders in this competition. With the appearance of the tall boy, a discussion erupted all around. Graham Ellicott ignored the people who were talking about it and went straight to the middle of the venue. There, a team from another school was standing. You're here? Ian Brime. Graham Ellicott looked at a tall and thin boy in the team and said. Graham Ellicott, we stopped last time. Ian Brime stared at Graham Ellicott, with a sharp light flashing in his eyes, and said, this time. If you let me meet you, I will not be polite. You can advance from the group first. Graham Ellicott smiled and said, this time. But every school's geniuses are here. Watching the conversation between the two, the others around were also whispering. That person is Ian Brime of the 3rd middle school? The big favorite for the top 3 this time? I wonder who is stronger, him or Graham Ellicott? It's hard to say. The diameter of Ian Brime's awakened planet is 31.3 kilometers, which is comparable to Graham Ellicott. It's said that Ian Brime and Graham Ellicott had sparred before. I wonder who will win and who will lose? As far as I know of inside information, there is no clear winner between the two. Everyone was talking about it. There was another commotion at the entrance. Only to see. A team in rather fancy uniforms walked in, headed by one person. A rather handsome boy immediately attracted the attention of many girls. It's Wang Tianyi from Jinyao Middle School. Is he Wang Tianyi, known as the star of Jinyao? He's so handsome. He's not just handsome, he's one of the 5 super geniuses with a planet diameter of more than 30 kilometers at the time of awakening. 5 super geniuses? I only know Wang Tianyi and Graham Ellicott from number 2 middle school. Who are the other 3? The other 3, Ian Brime from number 3 high school, the one from number 1 high school, and a student from number 7 high school. In that case, we really have a lot of geniuses this time. What's more, there are not only 5 super geniuses with a diameter of more than 30 kilometers, but also many top geniuses with a diameter of more than 25 kilometers. According to our teacher, This year's session is the most talented and terrifying session in Jiangcheng's history. A skinny boy said. Hiss. A sound of breathing could be heard from the side. Otherwise, why would the city master value this competition so much and even add a reward? The boy added. With so many talents, I'm afraid it will be difficult to even qualify. Hearing the surrounding discussions, Sullivan Nesby couldn't help but sigh. This time, Glenna Sorensen walked out of the lounge. Sullivan Nesby hurriedly stood up. John Denver also stood up calmly. Glenna Sorensen glanced at the two of them and asked, "Where are the others?" "Over there." Sullivan Nesby pointed to the side where Junhao and Maya Harris were. Glenna Sorensen turned his head to look over. When he saw a man beside Maya Harris, his face changed slightly. Immediately said, "Go, call Jared Fry and the others, and come with me to welcome a distinguished guest." Distinguished guest? Sullivan Nesby was unsure, but he still followed the instructions. John Denver naturally followed behind. At a corner of the venue, Maya Harris was standing with a man in his 30s. He was saying something. "Ha ha ha, what wind brought you to our Jiangcheng?" Before this man, Glenna Sorensen changed his usual coldness and greeted them warmly. "Glenna Sorensen, it's been a long time." The man looked at Glenna Sorensen and said with a smile, "I came to Jiangcheng this time on behalf of the school behind me, that is. The admissions teacher of our school in Labrador Province this year is probably me." Hearing the man's words, Glenna Sorensen's pupils shrank slightly and he laughed, "Welcome, welcome." He then introduced John Denver and the others. "This is Alice Johansson, the teacher of Tianxing University. Maybe you will enter Tianxing University and study under him." Tianxing University? Sullivan Nesby and Jared Fry were all a little surprised. Star University was not simple, it was one of the 32 best colleges and universities in the country. To be a teacher in this kind of school, it must be at least a level 4 planet master or higher. These people behind you should be the top performers in number 7 high school. Alice Johansson looked at John Denver and the others with a smile. "It's the students from our school who participated in this competition. They're not that talented." Glenna Sorensen said quite modestly, "It can't be compared with other schools at all. There are quite a few geniuses in Jiangcheng." Alice Johansson nodded as well as Sullivan Nesby and the others behind. His gaze quickly scanned Alice Johansson and Maya Harris. John Denver also saw it. There was quite a resemblance between the eyebrows of these two. They should be siblings or something. Glenna Sorensen was about to have a good chat with Alice Johansson. Suddenly, the whole venue went silent at once. Silence. There was silence. Glenna Sorensen and Alice Johansson subconsciously turned their heads. John Denver also turned his head. Inside the venue, everyone turned their heads, only to see the entrance of the venue. A new team walked in, all of them were wearing neat white uniforms. Unlike other schools' teams, this team was confident and relaxed. There was no trace of nervousness and stage fright. In the middle of this team, a tall and slender girl walked in like a crane among chickens. White as snow. The temperament was cool. Zara Ehrman. It's Zara Ehrman of the number 1 middle school. She is the genius from number 1 middle school, Zara Ehrman, the undisputed champion of this competition. The only genius in Jiangcheng who has transformed the super energy aura and created an immortal civilization. Our teacher once commented that she is the strongest among the many super geniuses in Jiangcheng's history. With her around, there is really no suspense for the winner of this grand competition. Everyone else, at best, they will compete for second or third place. The voices of discussion sounded continuously around the venue. Listening to the chatter, Zara Ehrman frowned slightly and led the way toward the interior of the venue. "Brother, is this the only person you think I can't beat?" Maya Harris was also sizing up Zara Ehrman. At this time she asked aloud. Alice Johansson, who was beside him, nodded and said, Yes, except for her, you have a chance to win, but Zara Ehrman. You are still far from her. So. This time you're competing for second at best. Okay, Zara Ehrman, I'm not an opponent for the time being, but for this second seat, I'll fight. A hint of confidence flashed in Maya Harris's eyes. At the location of the number 3 and number 2 middle teams, a group of people was also witnessing the figure of Zara Ehrman. Is Zara Ehrman really that strong? Someone asked. Zara Ehrman has awakened a super civilization, the planet of immortal cultivation. If there's no accident. The winner of this grand competition is none other than her. Graham Ellicott's face was gloomy. Graham Ellicott, we can't earn the championship, so let's see who can enter the final. Ian Breme said from the side. With the arrival of the last team, from the number 1 middle school, this Jiangcheng Grand Competition also officially started. There were many teams. One by one, they entered the venue. Here was the waiting area for the competition. Glenna Sorensen and teachers from other schools led their own team, standing in the waiting area. Soon, the principal of each school also arrived in person. This was naturally because the city lord of Jiangcheng would come in person at the opening ceremony. The city lord of Jiangcheng was the ruler and the strongest person of Jiangcheng. Which principal would not dare to give him face? There was even a headmaster. He rushed back with the rune car overnight. About 10 minutes passed. A terrifying aura descended on the high platform ahead. John Denver couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Looking up, he saw a tall and dignified man appearing above. According to the memory in his head, John Denver knew this man with a terrifying aura. He was the city lord of Jiangcheng. The strongest person in Jiangcheng. A level 5 planet master. As the city lord of Jiangcheng descended, the whole venue was silent. No one dared to make any noise. The city lord of Jiangcheng swept his gaze over everyone and said loudly, "Everyone, you are all the best students in our Jiangcheng. This time, I hope you do your best. Leave no regrets." The city lord of Jiangcheng didn't say much. After one sentence, this short opening ceremony was then considered to be the end. Next, the grand competition officially started. Firstly, the group draw was conducted. A total of 32 groups. According to the rules, there were 32 main players. John Denver was listed as the number 1 player. In this great competition, more than 100 colleges and universities in Jiangcheng participated. The number of participants was 320. Not every school had the same number of participants. According to the rules, the combined results of each school from the previous 5 years of the Jiangcheng Grand Combination will determine this year's quota. 5 years ago, the school where John Denver was, Jiangcheng No. 7 Middle School, ranked in the top 10. 5 seats were awarded. Jiangcheng No. 1 Middle School was the 5th consecutive champion. Therefore, the maximum number of 8 places was obtained. 320 participating students were divided into 32 groups. 10 people in each group. In each group, a single cycle competition system was adopted. There was only one qualifying spot. It was very cruel. In order to keep the strength of each group consistent, they would not let the favorites meet early. Another player was set up in the competition. A total of 32 players were chosen according to the planet's diameter when awakened. The diameter of the planet at the time of John Denver's awakening was 35.2 kilometers. He was the only student in Jiangcheng with a diameter of more than 35 kilometers and broke the historical record of Jiangcheng. There was no doubt about it. He was ranked as number 1. Looking at Ricky Brown's smiling expression, John Denver knew it. That should be the reason why John Denver only awakened an ordinary planet, but Ricky Brown still made the phone call himself. The main reason was for inviting him to the competition. This was the number 1 seed. In the previous competitions, almost all were swept up by the students of the number 1 middle school. Either they fell into the hands of top middle schools such as number 2, number 3, or Jinya Middle School. It would be good if number 7 could drink soup. Now there was a chance to occupy this glory. Ricky Brown naturally won't miss it. The number 2 seed was naturally the record-breaking favorite to win the championship, Zara Ehrman. Maya Harris ranked 6th. For the 6th seed. Looking at the top 10 seeds, 2 from the number 7 middle school were on the list. Even the cold Glenna Sorensen had a smile on his face. On the projection in front of the venue, the names and schools of the 32 seeded players lined up one by one on top. John Denver's name was at the top of the list, right above Zara Ehrman. Many people felt that it was a little dazzling. John Denver? The one who broke our Jiang Cheng record during the previous awakening? Yes, it's him, but unfortunately. I heard that there was an accident when this person transformed energy and what he finally created was just an ordinary planet. Ordinary planet? Impossible, the initial diameter of 35.2 kilometers and still not a transcendent planet? This matter is absolutely true. The teachers of our school have known leaders in the number 7 school and they are sure that this is true. Well, that's a shame. If it's normal, maybe this John Denver could also create a super civilization planet. A lot of people at the bottom were talking secretly. Among the group of teachers, most of them already knew about this. Their expressions did not change much. 32 seeded players were decided. The drawing of lots followed. The rules were also simple. First, the strength of each group should be roughly equal. Second, students from the same school will not be drawn into a group. Every school had to send a teacher to pick them up. Soon. The results of the draw for the 32 groups were out. In the projection screen, a list of participants in each group one by one appeared on top. When he saw the others in the first group that John Denver was in, Ricky Brown breathed a sigh of relief, looked at John Denver and said, "Your luck is good, this group is not very strong. Good luck." John Denver smiled faintly, but John Denver knew that this was not luck. Instead, the planet John Denver awakened had the largest diameter. So, the diameter of other planets allocated later will be a little smaller. The draw was completed. The grand competition officially started. Under the guidance of the staff, John Denver walked to the battle room. Outside the battle room, teachers and leaders of each school could clearly see the battle through the projection above. It seems that the overall strength of the first group is the weakest, but it is also the most chaotic. It is impossible to see who is most likely to qualify. One teacher analyzed. "Isn't there that record-breaking John Denver? He should be relaxed and stress-free." Another teacher who didn't know the inside story asked. "He awakened an ordinary planet, so it's going to be a bit hard." Another teacher explained. "How can an ordinary planet fight against a transcendent planet? This John Denver might become the first in history, the number 1 seed in the team that couldn't even come out." A teacher from the number 1 middle school said with a smile. "Len Hao, you better take care of your number 1 middle school." Glenna Sorensen frowned and shouted. As always. Both the number 1 and number 7 middle schools were somewhat at odds. He. The teacher named Lan Hao of number 1 middle school was not angry, and smiled. "Then we will wait and see." Other teachers listened to the conversation between the two. There were no sockets, but everyone knew that this teacher named Lan Hao's words were harsh, but it was the truth. They had been teachers for decades. Naturally, they had seen battles between ordinary and transcendent civilizations before. That scene. Cruel was not enough to describe it. It was terrible. Outside the battle room, John Denver walked over step by step, and on the other side, John Denver's opponent in his first battle. A tall and strong boy walked over under the guidance of the staff. Seeing John Denver, the tall and strong boy grinned, revealing his white teeth, and said, "You are the number 1 player John Denver who broke the Jiang Cheng record?" Huh? John Denver watched him quietly. The number one player is said to have never lost the first battle, this record. Today it will be me, Wang Tang, who will break it. The tall boy said loudly. You don't have the appearance of a great emperor. John Denver said indifferently and immediately entered the battle room. The tall and strong boy was baffled. He frowned slightly and said, when you lose, let's see if you can still laugh. Inside the battle room, John Denver sat on the chair. He began to enter the awakening space above the blue star and Chi was ready. Outside the planet channel, there was an army of 100,000. Mighty. For this battle for the glory of the Father, Chi was fully prepared. An army of 100,000 was formed. Among them, 50,000 was the regular troops. 50,000 were reserves. Of the 50,000 regular troops, there were 30,000 people who were the main force of the Great Desolate Army. The formation of the army of 100,000 brought a considerable burden to the Xia Kingdom. One minister after another objected, including the Minister of Household Affairs, the Minister of War and several cabinet ministers. Chi was ruthless in his determination. He took these opposition ministers directly and dismissed all of them. This also caused Chi to have a lot of curses on his back. But for the big competition this time, Chi endured it. At this time, Chi was standing on a high platform. He put on the general's armor again, put on his sword and stood on the high platform, looking down at the army below. Pre-departure mobilization. The warriors of the Xia Kingdom. Chi's eyes swept past the army and he said loudly, today is the day of our battle for glory. Do you have a good spear in your hand? Yes. The 100,000 strong army raised their spears and responded in unison. Is your blood hot? Chi asked again. Hot. The voices of the soldiers were higher. The sound was high in the sky. The birds in the surrounding mountains and forests were frightened and fled. Are your hearts brave or not? Brave? The rumbling sound pierced straight into the sky. With 3 questions, the morale of the army of 100,000 was completely stimulated. All of their faces were filled with excitement. Chi nodded in satisfaction. Although these words just now were old-fashioned, they were indeed quite effective. Fight for the Xia Kingdom, fight for the glory. Now, go. At John Denver's hint, Chi waved his hand. The door of the passage slowly opened and an army of 100,000 slowly entered, but not everyone went in. As specified, the duration of the competition was 10 hours. During these 10 hours, passages could be opened at any time. However, other people's planets didn't have so many people like John Denver's. There was no need for this. The opponent in the first battle was not strong. Therefore, John Denver decided to send only 3,000 people to fight. If anything unexpected happened, then it still would not be too late for the remaining Great Desolate Army to enter. The arena for the two sides to fight was located on a deserted planet. After the 3,000 warriors of Great Desolate Army entered, they saw a huge opaque wall in the middle. It was the energy wall. It could isolate the vision of both sides, to prevent both sides from attacking before the competition starts. Along with the Great Desolate Army of 3,000, there was also a 20-person transcendental research team. They would stay on the battlefield to provide real-time targeting solutions for the Great Desolate Army. With the breaking of the energy wall, the competition was officially started. John Denver saw it at a glance. Opposite them was a group of burly martial artists. Within the observation room, there were many teachers who were paying attention to this competition. When seeing that, within the passage, when a group of soldiers came out one after another, the room was silent in an instant. All eyes were wide open, feeling some disbelief. Just a moment ago, they were still discussing whether there would be at most 800 or 1,000 people on the ordinary planet John Denver had built. Seeing the result, this fact slapped their face. I'm TM. It was the opponent, the tall boy. Seeing the black mass of 3,000 troops, he couldn't help but utter foul language. By the book, 3,000 people was not much. But it depends on who you compare it with. Transcendents were inherently difficult to feed. Not to mention the planet that had just awakened only a month ago. Opponent Wang Tang built a martial artist planet. On the planet of Chinese martial arts, the number of martial artists was 108 in total. All of them had a good aura. Standing there, they were like 108 ancient beasts. But in front of the heavily armed great desolate army of 3,000, their momentum involuntarily decreased a little. Are those martial artists? She glanced at it and immediately ordered, "Get ready." The great desolate army had the most experience in facing martial artists. They immediately took action. In the front row was a huge shield. These shields were 2 meters high. It took 2 soldiers from the great desolate army to lift one. The shields were then stuck into the mound of earth, used to block the first wave of the martial artist's attack. Due to the limited iron ore in Blue Star, she had always been careful. Every piece of iron was used on the blade. These shields were all made of iron. Amazingly thick. Behind the shield formation, was a formation of spears. These spears were not ordinary spears but specially made. Each one was over 2 meters. Seeing this scene, John Denver nodded slightly. In his previous life, this formation was used to deal with the king of the feudal era, heavy cavalry. After the spear formation, it was a squad of numerous archers. Xia Kingdom's bow and arrow technology was at its peak. It had reached the point of no progress. She sat in the middle, commanding from the center, always ready to support or raid. Over time, in the middle of the field, the energy wall slowly disappeared. Competition officially started. The tall and strong boy Wang Tang glanced at the lineup of the great desolate army and shouted, "Don't be afraid, there are many people on the opposite side, but they are just a group of ordinary people, a group of soft sheep." Unlike John Denver, other people had a transcendent planet. As a planet masters, they would all end up directly communicating with the transcendent beings on the planet. Some of them even claimed to be gods. After all, for Planet Master, any life on the planet could be easily killed. This tall boy Wang Tang had established a sect. He was self-appointed as the patriarch. 108 martial artists also reacted, from the surprise just now. The big guy in the lead licked his lips and shouted, "Sect Master is right, these ordinary people are like sheep." It looks like a lot, but in fact, if a tiger kills one, the other sheep will run away in fright. And that's 108 tigers. Charge. Directly disperse these ordinary people. The big man in the lead raised his machete and shouted. The voice fell. He took the lead and charged. Wang Tang and the leader of the big man's understanding was not wrong. There had been duels between ordinary and transcendent civilizations in the past. In fact, that's what happened. Ordinary people looked at the crowd but transcendents charged. Most of the ordinary people were so frightened that they ran away in a panic, hating their parents for giving birth to 2 less legs. It's just that. Those were just ordinary people and the great desolate army here was a regular army that had fought hundreds of battles. There had never been an ordinary planet before. That could be like Blue Star. With so many people, naturally, they couldn't afford to form an army. The speed of the martial artists was quite fast. In the blink of an eye, they crossed a large distance. There was no hint of panic in the great desolate army. The sound of arrows breaking through the air sounded. Arrows rained down. Keep rushing towards these martial artists. Though. The fierce martial artists kept advancing while fending off these arrows. Get ready. A general watched this scene indifferently, and immediately raised his right hand. Behind him, a team of archers picked up the arrows in their hands. This archery team was divided into small teams of 3. specially used to deal against martial artists. The martial artist's jumping ability was very strong. One step could reach nearly 10 meters, and just as these martial artists took off into the air, they hadn't even landed yet. The arrows in the archery team's hands shot out. The three-person team each targeted the same martial artist. But the specific parts were different. Aimed at the top, middle and bottom respectively. The martial artist was completely sealed off. The martial artists in mid-air were unable to move around. They could only use a knife to block it. This way, more flaws were revealed. Ah! A scream sounded. A martial artist who jumped in mid-air was directly shot in the leg by an arrow. It fell from the air. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. From the archery team, one after another, an endless stream of arrows came out, aimed specifically at those martial artists who jumped into mid-air. As for the other archers, they covered the whole area. No room for martial artists to dodge. Swish, swish, swish. A rain of arrows poured down like locusts passing through. It was all over the place. Among the densely packed arrows, the 108 martial artists first sneered and blocked with their blades. But with the passage of time, each of these martial artists' hands was getting sore. This time, there was no end to it. Arrows were completely non-stop. Chi made preparations during these years. It was revealed at this time. The Xia Kingdom had built an unknown number of crossbows and arrows. At this moment, it was impossible for martial artists to get close. The three-man hunting team was firing at the same time. Ah! There was another scream. A tall and sturdy martial artist fell from mid-air, tightly holding his right leg. Upper, middle and bottom. The bottom was the most difficult to defend. In addition, the arrows from the three-man team were extremely tricky. If one of these martial artists was not careful, it'll get shot. Ah! Ah! Two more screams. The two martial artists who were closer fell in response to the sound. One arrow was in the thigh and another arrow was in the abdomen. Such injuries were not considered fatal for martial artists. However, it was impossible to continue fighting in a short period of time. Such a three-person team was the bow and arrow combination researched by the Transcendental Research Group, specifically designed to target martial artists. It looked simple, but the cooperation and tacit understanding among them was been years of hard work. Gradually, as the martial artists' stamina and concentration decreased, the screams grew more and more, one after another. At this time, the big man at the front line was not even close to the huge shield formation yet. The remaining martial artists could not help but feel a trace of fear and did not dare to move forward. Trash, a bunch of trash. Seeing this scene, the tall and strong boy Wang Tang couldn't help but curse, "Those are all ordinary people, what are you doing? Why are you being fucked so badly by a group of ordinary people? Charge! Attack for me! Charge over, charge into their army! Tigers enter the flock of sheep! What follows is a one-sided slaughter!" Wang Tang shouted with anger. Affected by this, the remaining martial artists also regained some of their courage. They screamed and kept rushing up, but the mind was in disarray. Not to mention the formation was as if a vicious dog was pouncing on food. A swarm of people. Free fire. Seeing these chaotic martial artists, who actually rushed towards the shield formation, the general in command gave a direct order. Free fire. That was, every archer no longer cooperates. See the opportunity for yourself. Hit the enemy with precision and deadly strikes. Instantly, a stream of arrows, like a life-threatening rope, pouncing on one headless martial artist after another. Aimed at the weak points of their insteps, thighs and heads, under the dense rain of arrows, no martial artist could survive. This seemingly short but unreachable journey. Screams resounded one after another. Just for a moment, on the ground, there were a dozen more martial artists who were hit by arrows. Finally, the remaining martial artists were afraid. Facing the 3,000 troops of the Great Desolate Army, a look of fear appeared on their face. A martial artist shouted, followed by, turned around and ran away frantically. The other martial artists seemed to have been infected. They also ran away. Only the first few people were left behind. Shoot him. Chi himself gave the order. He pointed at the burly man with the knife. Immediately, almost all of the arrows were aimed at this big man. Thousands of arrows pounced one after another. Even if this big man was the strongest of all martial artists, he couldn't resist either. In the eyes of horror, the big man with the knife was shot into a hornet's nest. The rest of the martial artists were horrified. There was no more hesitation. They turned around and ran away. Seeing this scene, Wang Tang's hands in the battle room were trembling slightly. The man with the knife was the one he was trying his best to nurture. He was one of the most talented martial artists. Now, he actually died on the battlefield. All troops in pursuit. Chi waved his long sword and pointed forward. The shield formation, spear formation and archery formation slowly moved forward, approaching the martial artists. Because this was the arena, the space was limited. With such a slow pace could also catch up with agile martial artists. The martial artists at this time were shrinking in the other corner of the battlefield like quails. Trembling. After the Great Desolate Army approached, another round of arrows rained down. These martial artists had no room to retreat. They totally became a live target. There were continuous screams. Martial artists were constantly being shot into hedgehogs. Surrender. I surrender. In the battle room, no matter how unwilling, Wang Tang still helplessly raised his hand. No more surrendering. He had painstakingly trained these martial artists. They were going to be shot to death. The referee next to him, a level 2 planet master, immediately terminated the game. A white flag appeared in the sky above the battlefield of the martial artist, announcing the end of the game. First battle. The Great Desolate Army won the victory step by step. If you like our video, please consider subscribe to our channel and like the video. This will motivate us to create more videos. Please give your feedback in the comments. I'll try to reach out and answer every comment.